Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/GOM.
You know how to get to Castle Black? Those your parents? Open your eyes. I'm going to eat them. Do you hear me? I'm going to eat your dead mama, and I'm going to eat your dead papa. Go tell the crows at Castle Black.
Well met, vengeful Dornishmen and Molestown whores, and welcome to Game of Microphones. I'm Lord Sterling, Sir Duncan, vanquisher of vile and villainous vermin.
And I'm Lady Rachel of House Fox, the controller of chaos.
And this is episode 75.
On this episode of our series Rewatch, we are covering Game of Thrones, Season 4, Episode 3, Breaker of Chains.
And in case you're not already aware, this series rewatch is from the perspective of someone who's current on the show. That means you've seen up through season 7. So if not, there's still time to catch one of Baelish's bolts to the face, so you don't have to hear these spoilers.
Warning.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. What'd you think about this episode, Lady Rachel?
I thought it was pretty good. How about you?
It's definitely a really good one. A lot of crazy stuff happens in it, too.
Yeah, definitely. I noticed there were a lot of pairings this episode. Pairings of characters.
Oh, yeah? Is that one of your numbers?
It's not one of my numbers, but they kind of... Actually, all but one are pairings.
Nice.
Yeah.
Let's jump right into it. What's your number 5?
My number 5 is Littlefinger and Sansa.
Nice.
Yeah, so I love the opening of this episode because the very first thing we see is Joffrey's purple face again.
Oh, snap.
And I totally forgot that. So I was a little like, oh my word. That's quite a sight to see right as I sit down.
Classic. Yeah, I forgot about that too.
Yeah. But I love when Dantos pulls Sansa away and they start running down to the boat and the bells start ringing and, you know, she puts her hood up because she has that amazing red hair.
Yep.
And Dantos hops in the boat and she kind of hesitates and she looks back one last time at King's Landing and she pauses and then she like scurries into the boat.
Oh, man. And Dantos gets a raw deal here, huh?
He totally does. I thought the cinematography was really pretty and kind of creepy as they rode out to that ship in the fog.
Yeah, I have beautiful misty harbor in my notes. I thought it looked awesome.
Awesome. And I love that, you know, they get to the side of the ship and Sansa kind of hesitates to climb the ladder and Dantos says to her, "You're stronger than you think." And I thought that was a nice little sentiment, not just because she can, you know, obviously climb the ladder, but it just kind of...
climbing the ladder, very symbolic.
Yeah. I was just going to say, like, she's climbing the ladder because, I mean, you fast forward to season 7, she's kind of arrived. And
yeah, definitely.
Baelish is the one that does say chaos is a ladder. So.
She knocks the ladder out from under him.
Yes, she certainly does. So, we see Peter kind of talking to Sansa, and then you hear Dantos kind of below, and he goes, you know, shh, voices carry on the water. And
Don't want the queen to hear you.
Yeah, that's kind of creepy. And I thought it was kind of odd, too, that Baelish kind of allows Sansa to watch Dantos die.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, too. She's like stuck there looking over at the edge at him.
Yeah, I didn't think that was really necessary, but I guess it just happened really quickly, and maybe Littlefinger didn't notice that, but I love their dialogue with each other. Peter kind of telling Sansa, like, she's obviously a suspect, and she's like, I didn't murder anybody. And
it's his doing, too. Like, he made her a suspect.
Exactly.
He's the reason that she fled and looked really suspicious, and the reason that she had the necklace on in the first place. So he's immediately manipulating her by forcing her to have to leave, so she'll end up in his arms, type thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Super twisted.
And I loved his line, "I don't trust drunk fools."
Yeah, he's a drunk and a fool.
And then he had another great line. He had a couple great lines in this scene.
He's always got a good line, right?
Yeah. Money buys silence for a time. A bolt to the heart buys it forever.
Yeah.
Money buys a man's silence for a time. A bolt in the heart buys it forever.
Thug life.
And then, he says to her, "You're safe now. I promise you that." And I'm like, dude, you're taking her to marry the Boltons.
Yeah,
That's such a lie.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. Although that isn't arranged quite yet, is it? She's got to go to the Vale first and everything. So maybe
that's
maybe
true.
he meant it at this point in time. But then again, he doesn't know what he's like. He doesn't understand what love is.
Quite the chess player. So I
Agreed.
think he's always thinking 5 or 6 moves ahead.
So you're saying it could be in the works already?
I think it might be a thought in his mind, but not in action yet.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that was my, kind of quick number 5. I just liked their dialogue, their interaction, and I think this is where Sansa really starts being educated by Littlefinger more than he thinks she is listening to him. She's
Gotcha.
picking up a lot more in this dialogue than he gives her credit for, and obviously it comes back to bite him in the ass in season 7.
Yeah, it does. Big time. Yeah, you're totally right.
So did you have any notes that you wanted to touch upon this scene with?
Yeah, sure. Poor Dantos, he didn't know that he was a liability. he just thought he was going to get some gold and save the chick who saved his life. And so he, it's kind of poetic too. She saved his life before, and now he gave his life to save her life. So that's sort of like an interesting turnaround there. And like I was saying, he's just following orders, basically making this happen, thinking he's doing the right thing, and he's going to get some gold for it because he probably thinks Joffrey's a scumbag, like everybody does. Plus, he gets to save Sansa, so he's like, "I'm really making a difference here. This is great."
Right.
And little does he know that he's just one more loose end that needs to be tied up. And so this is the second time in just a couple episodes that people get tricked, and instead of getting something pleasant, they get rewarded with a crossbow. Like at the Red Wedding, they think they're going to be getting sweet music, and instead, nope, thrum, the crossbow.
Man.
Here Dantos thinks he's getting a nice gold payment, and nope, thrum, crossbow to the face and chest.
Yeah, that was intense too. I mean, it went like
right in his cheek.
It wasn't to the heart. It went straight through his cheek and like out the back of his head.
Yeah, the first one. That was gnarly. It was pretty cool though. And then the way he sort of like falls back and he's just like floating there, and Sansa just hangs over the edge looking at him for like
screaming.
Yeah.
Voices carry on the water.
Yeah, it's so funny. And even Sansa, like, she doesn't understand all the factors. She's like, he just, he was saving me, he saved me. And he's like, my lady, he followed all my orders, every one of them. And it was all for the gold.
He did it all for the gold.
And she's like, huh. So pretty brutal. We also learned that he had the necklace made. So remember we were thinking that maybe it was one of the necklaces that Olenna had made?
Yeah, that's right.
So apparently it was Baelish that had it crafted, and it really was just a coincidence that it looked like Lady Marjorie's, or Queen
Yeah.
Marjorie at this point. Maybe.
Queen, kind of queen, halfway queen.
Yeah. It's crazy how she keeps trying to become a queen and like never like really gets it.
Yeah, she actually...
Well, yet, at least.
Yeah, she actually... Let me find my notes on this here. When she's talking with the Queen of Thorns, she talks about how she must be cursed because her first husband preferred the company of men and is dead, and the second husband,
like to torture animals.
Torture people. So she's like, I must be cursed. And then I love Elena's remark back to her after Marjorie was saying how awful it was to see him clawing at his throat. And
yeah,
she
that's
said,
brutal.
You may not have enjoyed watching him die, but you enjoyed it more than you would have enjoyed being married to him, which is completely a true statement.
And it's just like, for her, she may not have enjoyed killing Joffrey, which we know because when she confesses it to Jaime, she has this whole rant about how like she'd never seen the poison work before and she didn't know it was going to be that horrible, and it like made her upset. So she's going through the same thing. Like, it was uncomfortable and unpleasant for her, but it was better than, she enjoyed it more than she would have enjoyed seeing her granddaughter wed to that maniac.
I know, and just a lifetime of trying to control a psychopath. I just couldn't even imagine.
Yeah, it'd be so brutal. Oh man, anything else you want to add about that scene, the boat scene, or anything?
No, I liked the scene. It was pretty short and sweet. It's the opener, but it definitely starts Littlefinger and Sansa's journey together, and we all know kind of where that leads over the next few seasons. So I thought it was an important one to add in the top 5.
Definitely, agreed.
What's your top 5?
All right, my number 5 is Time for Class. And it's Tywin schooling Tommen over Joff's dead body.
This is my number 2, so I'll collaborate with you.
Nice. It's just a great scene, and to sum it up really quickly, basically what I got from it is that not only is Tywin like very knowledgeable about the qualities of what make a good king and the downfalls of kings and the history of kings and King's Landing, but he's teaching Tommen a great lesson, but also in doing that, forcing Tommen to be subservient to him, basically. So they go through each of these things, like what makes a good king. Is it holiness? Is it justice? Is it strength? And we can talk about all these in a minute. But yes, it's wisdom that makes a good king. And a wise king knows what he knows and what he doesn't know, and that's true too. One of the things that's really important, like we've talked about, is known unknowns, and you want to make sure you know all the unknowns, so then they're known unknowns, etc. And but that's when he twists it to a wise king listens to his counselors and heeds their advice until he comes of age, and that's also true. But what he's really doing here is saying, you're going to fucking listen to everything I say.
Exactly. I'm going to rule this kingdom through you.
So funny. So it's like a brilliant way of manipulating Tommen into being subservient to him by starting out as such a good lesson, and then so quickly devolving into a control mechanism. And even when he said that, it probably went right over Tommen's head,
Yeah, I do think Tommen was listening with intent.
Definitely.
But, I also love Tywin in this scene because while he's schooling Tommen, he's completely insulting Joffrey, which they're standing over his dead body. His mother is like
literally crying
next to him and saying like, this is not the time or place. And Tywin's just like, your brother was not a wise king. He was not a good king.
If he had been, perhaps he'd still be alive.
Great. Yeah, it was just such a great scene.
Totally. Great.
Tywin, his presence is unnerving. Yeah. When he's so commanding and so calm.
It's like he's constantly stalking his prey, like just
Yes,
You know what
like
I
a
mean?
lion.
Yeah, or even like a wolf, kind of. But not
there you
like
go.
no connotations was intended there. Just made me think of like a wolf stalking his prey. But yeah, a lion too, for sure. Yeah, he's shitting all over Joffrey. Cersei's crying. We actually see Cersei cry in this scene. Like she literally
She's
sheds
not even
a tear.
blinking. She's just like looking off, just listening to this. And I always wonder what she's thinking in that scene because her face is saying many different things, in my opinion.
It's funny too because she's like, this is hardly the time or the place. Like she doesn't want to have Tommen be subjected to being, having a lesson taught to him at this time, but she's in a totally different mind state than Tommen. Tommen was probably picked on every day of his life by Joffrey, so he doesn't seem too upset by the whole death of the king, really.
Yeah, and we kind of get a glimpse of that when Marjorie comes to visit Tommen in his king's quarters, and Sir Pounce, I love Sir Pounce, jumps up and
exactly.
Tommen said, Joffrey always threatened to cut him up and put him in my stew or something like that.
Yeah.
So that he was probably tormented, maybe not as much as other people by Joffrey, but definitely affected by his psychotic brother's behavior.
Absolutely. So we get our introduction to Tommen here. Like we got a little clip of him last time where he was laughing at the dwarves fighting, and then realized he was next to Tyrion and stopped laughing. So we got a little insight into his character here, but we get a little more this time. So Tywin starts asking him questions. Your brother's dead. Do you know what that means? I'm not trying to trick you. It means I'll become king, and so, yes, and what kind of king do you think you'll be? And he's like, a good king? And it's like, already shows he's like so like wishy-washy and like, like some people would be like, a good king, I'm going to do this, I'm going to be like this. But he's like, am I saying the right thing? Like, who should I listen to? What should I do? He doesn't have his own vision and his own personality. And then that could partially be because of his age, and that he was second born, so he wasn't, or third born even, so he wasn't trying to he wasn't in the place of being schooled every day about, one day you'll be a king, you need to be thinking about these type of things. So
no, he was a second son, and pretty much out of the line of succession, really until kind of Robert died, because Robert was still fairly young. Joffrey came into his kinghood early in life. Yeah. And I mean, what's the likelihood that Robert and Joffrey die within a couple years of each other? And so I don't even think really it was on Tommen's radar. I think he probably assumed that he would be a prince like Oberyn the rest of his life, be royalty, but never hold the throne. Yeah,
exactly. I agree. So then they're going through the different, qualities of kings, and Tywin's asking him, what do you think is the king's single most important quality? And Tommen thinks for a second, and he says, holiness, And we learn that Baelor the Blessed was holy. He built this whole sept, this beautiful building that they've been having all these weddings in and everything. He also named a 6-year-old boy High Septon because he thought the boy could work miracles, and he ended up fasting himself to death, so
because food was of this world and it was sinful.
Yeah. So that goes to show you that maybe holiness isn't the most important thing. Although it could be argued that, certain characteristics of the faith would be, could be incorporated to make a leader good and just. Speaking of just, the next quality that Tommen lists is justice. And Tywin always has an answer for everything. He's thought about this a lot. Tywin is a really smart guy, and regardless of what you say about his intents or his actions, So he says, a good king must be just, but Orys the First was just, and everyone applauded him for his reforms, but he wasn't just for long because he let his younger brother murder him in his sleep. Was that just of him to abandon the subjects and, be too gullible to recognize the evil around him, and obviously that's not a good thing. In order to be like a good king would have to be just, but also be able to think like a criminal, so he could see that type of thing coming. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you don't want to be too trusting with the people around you. I mean, it's one thing to be just, but it's one thing to be like lackadaisical about it.
Yeah, definitely. So then he mentions strength, and obviously strength by itself is no important thing. Like, doesn't make for the perfect king. Robert was strong, and he put the kingdom in total debt, went to 3 small council meetings in 17 years, and basically, destroyed a lot of stuff and screwed up big time.
I thought it was funny that he mentioned him as Robert and not your father.
True. That's an interesting way to refer to it.
Yeah, and I want to just backtrack back to the holiness. I think It's kind of foreshadowing, because Tommen's kind of downfall is the High Sparrow and being kind of sucked into the religion of it, and not basically not keeping church and state separated.
That's a great point too, because his first inclination in here is to lean towards holiness. So that means that that's a weakness for him to potentially, like you said, get dragged into something like that down the line. Since it's the first thing he thought of, he has like a preponderance to go in that direction.
He seems to be more religious than the rest of his family.
It comes back to bite him for sure. Then they get to wisdom, and he puts it in perspective, saying, but what is wisdom? Like when you have one complicated problem coming at you from one direction and another complicated problem coming at you from another direction, how do you make a choice? Do you have any expertise in either of these complications? And Tommen's like, no.
No. What are you even talking about?
Right. And Tywin's like, no, of course not. So you want to rely on the experts, me. Come to me, basically. Yeah. I'm going to run everything, bitch. And it's so funny. I just love the way that he twists it all, and it turns from this like really like deep philosophical lesson into the major point being, I'm the boss.
Definitely. And we all know that Tywin is, the real boss behind it all. So
right.
I think he is obviously in a way relieved that Joffrey is gone, and he has a very impressionable Tommen to mold into, what could be one of the more decent kings the realm has seen in a long time.
Right. And you hit the nail on the head.
I think that's echoed in later seasons, that he might be, I think Cersei says it, he might be the first king in 50 years to sit there that actually deserves it.
Oh, yeah. I think you're right.
When he's getting crowned, I think she says that.
Yeah, that's true. And you're right about Tywin too, having an easier time with Tommen than Joffrey, and that's what makes Tyrion be like suspicious of Tywin and think he may be even suspect in Joffrey's murder later in the same episode. But we'll get to that later.
Sure.
Anything else you want to add, or are we good?
I do like seeing just another glimpse of Tommen's innocence when Tywin, explains that he must marry, and, why do you need to get married so I can father children?
He's like,
do you know how that happens? And he's like, yeah, I think so. And he's like, but has anyone explained the details to you? And it's just kind of a great scene to show how innocent Tommen really is. I mean, I think in the books, he's extremely young.
Yeah, they've aged up a lot of the younger characters in this show just to make it less weird when they're getting freaky and stuff like that.
Yeah, but isn't he only 10 or 11 in the books at this point?
If that.
Yeah, he's very, very young.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's young in the show too. He's probably 14 or 15.
Probably something like that.
He looks young to me.
Yeah. I wonder how old. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how old the actor is, but yeah, he's pretty young. He's supposed to be 13, probably 14.
Okay, yeah. Like, and then I know we touched upon Cersei's face, and I just thought Lena Headey played her so well, because she had a essentially silent role in this scene, and just the look on her face. I know I had said this is. There were a lot of different emotions going on. She's grieving. She kind of wants to protect Tommen. and she probably wants to slap her dad across the face.
Yeah, for sure.
And she's holding it all together and just not blinking with her mouth is really tight and there's just tears in her eyes, and it's kind of sad in that moment. Again, really Cersei's only relatable quality is being a mom, and she's grieving over her child, and while someone completely bashes him, and while he totally deserves to be bashed, it's just really, like she said, it's really not the time.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. It's also not the time for what happens next. And Tywin talking to Tommen about the birds and the bees may have given Jaime some ideas as they cross paths when he's entering the Sept and they're leaving at the end there. Is that part of your main notes, or is that like just a side note? Like
this is a side note for me, but we can definitely talk about it since we're on this subject.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. Okay, so let's cover that. This was like one of the most controversial scenes of the show. Did you know that?
Yeah, I had read a little bit about it because I know in the books, well, I know in the show it comes off more of like a rape scene, but I know in the books Cersei enjoys it more. Yeah,
it's more clear in the books that it's consensual, that there's a point where she stops saying no and she's like, okay, come on. Like,
yeah, let's just get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I watched closely knowing that was kind of a point of contest with viewers. And
there is a moment.
Yeah, you do see her kiss him back and like embrace him and pull on him. So I think it's an intense scene because it's by their dead son, and she is saying no, and Jaime is saying, I don't care.
Right.
But there are moments, she is kissing him and she is holding him and pulling him into her. So I take it as awkward, and she's saying no because of where they are, not because she doesn't want him. Because she initiates kissing him. Right. First.
The other thing is that kissing him back is one thing, but like the pulling on him and stuff like that, it's kind of subtle, so if you're not like looking for it, like if you don't know it's consensual in the books, it's probably easy to overlook. Sure. If you're looking at like another area of the screen or something like that. Or if you're distracted by Jaime saying, I don't care.
Especially a first-time viewer watching that.
Yeah.
Especially if you haven't read the books. It's like, whoa, what is going on? This is gross.
Yeah.
Like, it's gross because it's incest. And it's gross because their dead son is like right above them and his body is like moving while they're like struggling with each other. And
yeah, it's pretty rough.
It's very awkward.
Yeah, I could definitely see how people could see it as being a rape, for sure.
Definitely.
So yeah, that's a pretty intense scene.
Yeah, I want to make just a couple more notes. I think it's very interesting before they get it on. That that Cersei tells Jaime, kill Tyrion. It's justice, and I think it's really fitting that Jaime ends up letting him go, and it's kind of a middle finger to Cersei for sure when Jaime lets Tyrion go, because she is begging him to kill his brother, and he's like, you want me to kill my own brother? Like, what are you talking about?
We know he's like done with breaking oaths and stuff as to the most he can, so she's basically saying, become a kinslayer, and he's like, no, I don't want to do that.
Exactly.
So it's rough.
And maybe
for him.
It's kind of foreshadowing, because he does let Tyrion go, that maybe it's kind of a foreshadow that maybe Jaime will end up killing Cersei in season 8.
Yeah. Or siding with Tyrion more overall in general.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I do love Jaime's line, you're a hateful woman. Why have the gods made me love a hateful woman?
Right. Yeah, that was pretty brutal.
Which is so true. It was kind of sad because he's not saying that he doesn't want to love her or that he doesn't love her. It's just like, why are you such a bitch?
Yeah.
I love you, but you're a bitch.
I'll kick you in the balls! Bitch! I love you!
Yep.
So,
and she also explains her her reasoning for thinking that it was Tyrion, and it's pretty circumstantial, honestly.
Very.
It was Tyrion. He killed him. He told me he would. A day will come when you think you are safe and happy, and your joy will turn to ashes in your mouth. That's what he said to me. But even that isn't a direct threat. Like, that could be karma coming back to do that to her. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's pretty clear that Tyrion did not kill her, or did not kill him. And it's like he says later, is like, if I had planned to kill him, I wouldn't have been standing there looking like amazed as it's happening, trying to figure out what's going on, you know?
Yeah. He says, if I were arranging a royal assassination, I'd plan it in such a way that I wouldn't be standing there in such a way gawking like a fool when the king died.
Yeah. Hilarious.
It's a great
unless that's
line.
part of the plan to throw everybody off.
That's
Make it look
true.
like you have no idea what's going on.
Like
Olenna. Yeah, exactly.
Idiots, help your king.
Somebody help that dear boy. Yeah, it's hilarious. So yeah, she's got the psychology of it like down, you know.
Definitely.
She really thinks like a criminal. Anything else you want to say about that, or should we jump to your number 4?
No, I think we can move on.
All right.
So my number 4 is Haria. The Hound and Arya.
Or also known as Around.
Around? Okay.
Around. Arya and the Hound.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that works too.
If we're going to go with the weird nicknames.
I like Haria. So I found it very telling when the Hound is talking to Arya and he says, you know, she's like, well, where will you go after you sell me to my aunt, essentially? And he goes, you know, maybe I'll go to the east and go fight with the second sons. And it's a nice sentiment because he is a second son.
Yes.
And then you hear up above them, you know, 7 blessings. And what are you doing kind of on my land? And Arya kind of goes into telling another, what I dub faceless man story.
Yeah.
About the Hound being her father and their house being burned down with their mother in it.
Yeah, she's totally playing the game of faces.
Yeah, so I think she's just so preconditioned to being a faceless man that it comes easy for her in later seasons.
Yeah, she's like totally meant to do this. That's like her thing, is always doing this type of thing, pretending to be somebody that she's not.
Yeah. And right now it's pure protection, so her identity is kept safe. And also, in a way, kind of the Hound's identity, even though some people do recognize the Hound, it's pretty immediate that they know either they recognize him, or if they don't recognize him right away, they don't know who he is.
Yeah.
And I liked the old man, or the dad. He goes, there's a storm coming. You'll be needing a roof tonight. And I thought that was quite a foreshadow to fast forward to season 7 when the Hound and Thoros go back to that hut and it's storming outside. And that's why they're going into their cabin to get out of the snow and the storm.
True.
So that was kind of sad knowing that the Hound is right, that they'll both be dead come winter.
Yeah, and I was wondering, is it a prediction, or is it more of a self-fulfilling prophecy? And he stole the guy's silver, which put him at a disadvantage, which like put the nail in his coffin, basically, or even potentially caused the death of him and his daughter. What do you think?
Yeah.
I mean, it's impossible to know, really.
I think it's a prediction. From
his logic certainly makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think he's thinking that them having that silver would keep them alive. It might have kept them alive a little longer, but I don't think it would have kept them alive through the whole winter, because it's supposed to be a really long winter, and bad winter.
That's true.
So I think in his mind, it's like, even if they have this silver, I mean, maybe he's not even thinking this at this point, but even if they had, it's just silver. It's not gold. He said it's a bit of silver. It's like a tiny little bag. I mean, it might have bought them a couple extra months, but I still don't think they would have been alive when the Hound came back for them. to that place.
Yeah, it's probably
What
true.
do you think?
Maybe a bit of both, like I think their odds were really slim, and I don't think the Hound helped them, helped improve their odds at all. So it's interesting too, Arya, as they're leaving the scene of the crime, basically Arya's like, I thought you said you weren't a thief, and he's like, I wasn't. And so it's sad that he's been forced into a life of crime, basically, at this point. This is the first time we see him do something that's like really fucked up without like having an order to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I just thought the scene, I felt really bad for the dad. He's praying to the seven, and you can just see the look of hunger on both their faces. I mean, that rabbit stew is just staring them straight in the face. I'm sure the smell is overwhelming. And
yeah, the Hound looks so hungry.
He's like, and we pray that the stranger doesn't kill us in our sleep. And he just like,
are you gonna do this for all 7 of the fuckers?
And Arya goes, Father. It's so cute. And they just start sucking down this rabbit stew, and the father and Sally are just like wide-eyed staring at them.
Yeah, the Hound like dumps it everywhere.
I know, it's just spilling everywhere, and then he's like, got any ale?
What kind of man doesn't keep ale in his house? The broke kind, dude, the broke kind, and you didn't help it.
And then they kind of go into talking about the Red Wedding, they're calling it. Again, I didn't realize how much violating guest right comes up before and after the Red Wedding.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
This rewatch. Yeah, I mean, he's like, he offered him bread and salt and he killed him under their roof. And
yeah, he called it sacrilege.
Yeah, definitely. And, the Hound, just in his rage of being really hungry, he goes, guest right doesn't mean that much anymore. And he goes, well, it means something to me. Like, you're sitting in my house right now eating my food.
The gods will have their vengeance, he adds.
Yeah. Frey will burn in the 7 hells for what he did. And then it pans to Arya right after he says that. And Arya has like this look on her face. And I just loved that. It was kind of a foreshadow that she's the one to kill Walder Frey.
So the phrase bread and salt is kind of funny, right? Here, eat some salt. Like, it was just eating salt, you know what I mean?
I know.
I put salt on my bread.
It was a blatant disrespect, truly. It was very literal, that scene of them actually eating bread and salt.
Right. And the talk of guest right sort of, it sort of happens in reverse here with Sandor stealing this guy's silver after being his guest and essentially dooming him to death, so it's not that guest right is being broken, but it's like kind of the reverse, which is sort of funny.
Definitely. I loved Arya's face as the guy is talking about needing a helping hand around the farm, and he says fair wages for fair work, and the Hound kind of takes him up on that.
Near fair market, too.
Yeah, Arya seemed kind of surprised that the Hound would say yes and stay there. So I think she figures something's kind of up his sleeve because she knows at this point that he's taking her to the Vale.
Right. Then she knows they have a plan. So she's like, what?
Yeah. And then... You're the worst shit in the 7 kingdoms.
There's worse shits than me. There's worse than me. What does he say?
How many Starks do they have to behead before you figure it out?
Yeah. It's a brutal line that kind of puts things in perspective. She's like, oh shit, yeah, how many more? There aren't really many more to go.
Not a lot. Well, as far as she's aware, it's just Sansa. Mm-hmm. Or no, does she not know her brothers are missing at this point or presumed dead?
Good question. I'm not sure if she knows that they're missing or not. I mean, she had to have heard something, right? At some point, she's had to have asked somebody, well, what about the other Stark kids? There's a couple parts where, like, when the old guy says that, basically invites them to spend the night and says that Sally makes a mean rabbit stew. The Hound seems uneasy in that scene, as if he already knows that nothing good's going to come of it.
Yes.
which is kind of funny. And one of the other cool things I liked about this scene was during that intro part of the scene, you get a good look at Sandor's armor and stuff. And his chainmail is like all fucked up and like it looks like he's been through like 1,000 battles.
Really? I didn't even notice any of that.
Yeah,
I'll have to go back
cool.
and look at it.
It's like dangling on like tatters off of his elbow and stuff. It's pretty neat. Yeah, that was my number one too. That scene, fair wages for fair work.
Awesome. So we are on your number 4.
Yes, ma'am. My number 4 is Oberyn and Tywin.
Okay, this is my number 1, so we can...
Cool. Before Tywin arrives, a scene opens up to Oberyn and Oliver and Ilaria and various other whores all intertwined on a big, huge bed.
Orgy!
Yeah, it's hilarious. And we get some insight to Oberyn's ideas about sexuality. Where she said, he's asking Oliver like what his deal is, and he says everyone has this preference, and Oberyn replies that then everyone is missing half the world's pleasure, which is funny because that's my attitude about food. Like when it's like vegetarians versus like people who eat meat. It's like, why just go with one or the other, With sexuality or sexual attraction, not so much for me. I have a preference,
Sure.
Which is funny. But Oberyn has solid logic either way, The gods made this, and it delights me. The gods made that, and it delights me. When it comes to war, I fight for Dorne. When it comes to love, I don't choose sides, which is funny.
That's a great line.
He has great logic when it comes to a lot of things, as we'll see during his discussion with Tywin as well. There's a funny line where Ilaria says... girls and boys will all line up to fuck him until the day he dies, and it's sort of foreshadowing his death in the near future.
Very much so.
Season, which sucks. He was such a great character, man. Really a bummer to lose him at the end of the season.
Yeah, he shone brightly and then fizzled out.
Yeah, big time.
In a very horrid scene.
Exploded out.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So that's when he actually has a good reply to that too, where he says they will all have to line up behind you,
Yeah,
which
I love
great.
that.
And then that's when Tywin shows up, and they get a moment to themselves. And I'm thinking, damn, Oberyn's got Tywin all alone, unprotected. He could just kill him right now.
I love how he goes, "Would you like to sit?" And Tywin's like, "No." It's like you guys have been like rolling around in those sheets for
it's like
a while now. It's like, I'm not sitting down in there.
Hell no. So he says to Tywin, "I'm sorry about your grandson," and Tywin's like, "Are you?" He's like, "I don't believe that a child is responsible for the sins of his father or his grandfather." And that's sort of this philosophical like intelligence that Oberyn has, that it's true, like every man is responsible for his own actions. They shouldn't be blamed for other people's actions. So yeah, Oberyn definitely just has an unmistakable logic to the way he views reality, which is admirable and commendable. I like Oberyn.
I do too. He seems like a very interesting and well-rounded individual.
So Tywin's suspicious, and he doesn't know if Oberyn's just throwing him off by throwing some good logic at him or what. So basically, Oberyn goes on and gets into the details of the murder. An awful way to die, which we all agree on. It must be horrible. And Marjorie was saying how awful it was too. And so Tywin is like, and what way is that? And he basically says, yeah, I know he was poisoned. Is this an interrogation? Like, yeah, I know that, like, about poisons. I was trained at the Citadel and studied poisons. This is how I know, And some people think the king choked. Some people believe the sky is blue because we live inside the eye of a blue-eyed giant, which I thought was a fun reference back to season 1 with
Old Nan.
The Dothraki ladies talking with Daenerys. Remember that? Macumber?
Didn't Old Nan say something about it too?
Yeah, I think so. Yep. Yeah, definitely. Bran was familiar with the story, I believe. So he's like, why haven't you thrown me in a dungeon? And then it becomes clear that Tywin wants something from him, and he's manipulating everybody in this episode and setting things up. He's getting the king under his thumb. He's getting a council, like, put together, small council, which will bring Dorne back into the fold. And he knows that he can potentially win Oberyn and Dorne's loyalty by giving them the mountain, which is pretty funny. He's totally willing to throw Gregor under the bus to bring the kingdoms together.
Yeah, and the look on Oberyn's face when he says that, I think he's trying to figure out if Tywin's bluffing or not, because that's a pretty big prize to offer up, to sit on the small council and, be on the jury for Tyrion's murder. I do like Tywin's sentiment when he said, men at war commit all types of crimes without their superior's knowledge.
Yeah. And
that was
he's
a very
like,
interesting testament.
Yeah, so so you deny involvement in Elia's murder, and categorically, and it's interesting that he actually does deny it, like, straight up. He doesn't skirt the question or dodge it like Bronn talking about Shay getting on the boat. Did you see her? Did you see the boat sail away? He actually says, like, I deny it, categorically.
Do you think he gave the orders or not?
I don't know, because then there's like a moment of silence between the two where they're looking each other in the eye, and Tywin's the left corner of his mouth is like twitching and like almost like just a hint of a sneer, like he's messing with it, and so it's really hard to tell. I'm not sure. What do you think?
Tywin doesn't strike me as someone to lie if he's asked a straight up question.
Unless he thinks that the lie will save a lot of trouble down the line and make things a lot better. Like in the case with the Red Wedding, where he's willing to skirt the proper procedures, and do something that would be more like immoral, essentially, to save tens of thousands of lives from dying in war.
The greater good.
Right. So I could see him lying if he thought that it would bring the kingdoms together and make Dorne fall in line. But that little sneer, that flicker of a smile at his mouth, makes me think partially that he knows and he arranged it.
I think maybe I don't know. I go back and forth on this sentiment, because I feel like maybe he gave the orders to kill his sister, but not necessarily the children. But then I go back and it's like the children, especially the son, would be the line of succession. So
right.
If Tywin were to give the orders to snuff out that family line, he would have given the orders to kill the children too.
Yeah, the children would be the more important targets. Like, you could let the queen live, and without the king who's dead, she can't make she can't do anything. Yeah, so she becomes a relic essentially at that point.
Yeah, so I just kind of go back and forth on that. On that point, and we know that Tywin, while he says to Tyrion, I wanted to carry you out into the sea and let the waves wash you away, he wanted to kill his own son. He didn't end up going through with it.
True, that's interesting. Yeah, and it could be actually, that would have been before the sack of King's Landing, right? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So interesting. Maybe that could be a clue that he wouldn't necessarily order it. But then again, it's not his kids that would be on the line.
Yeah, and then when he does say, I can arrange for this meeting, I love that that's a total foreshadow of the Mountain and Oberyn meeting in the trial by combat.
Oh, yeah, totally. Except for Oberyn arranges that meeting.
Yeah, he does, I guess, in a way. Tywin sets it up because Oberyn becomes a part of the jury, so he gets involved emotionally in this trial, and then placates to Tyrion and seeing it as an opportunity to take on the Mountain.
Yeah, it's true. Just an interesting little historical parallel. If the Mountain had killed the children of Elia and Rhaegar, and not Elia herself. If the kingdom wasn't completely overthrown, it could have ended up with a situation like Elizabeth the First of England, Henry VIII, his second daughter from the Tudors.
Yeah,
she ends up being the end of the Tudor line because she never had kids or anything like that. So after she died, it passed on to a different house, basically.
yes, it did. That's right.
Just an interesting little historical thing there. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. Tywin is really extending an olive branch here to Dorne, giving them a potential position of power in the small council and anything. Or so it seems, it could just be another control mechanism.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting that you bring that up because Tywin sees a need to have Dorne back into the fold. He said, we are not the Seven Kingdoms until Dorne returns to the fold. And I find it interesting because Tywin was unconcerned about the dragons to the east when he talked to Joffrey a few episodes ago.
Right.
And now he seems to be kind of worried about them. So I'm curious maybe what changed in Tywin's head about the dragons. Maybe he has more info that they're getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
But I found it interesting that we discover that only the Dornish resisted the dragons.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting too. I had totally forgotten that somehow they were not really conquered by Aegon.
Yeah, and maybe this is some, brought up in the books or in the history books of Westeros, but I'm curious how the Dornish resisted the conquering and the dragons, or were they just not even kind of bothered
targeted?
because they were so far south.
So basically, during Aegon's conquest, Rhaenys, his sister and wife, flew on Meraxes to Dorne, where they found empty holdfasts and no people, because all of the Dornish people had gone to hide in the deserts and the mountains. So Rhaenys conquered holdfasts, but it was pointless because there was no people to be ruled. So eventually, she just left. And Dorne escaped the initial conquest. Then in 4 AC, the first Dornish war began, where Aegon and his sisters tried to conquer Dorne for the second time. And this resulted in 10 AC with the death of Rhaenys and her dragon Meraxes at Hellholt. And there was an attempt on Aegon's life, which afterwards he formed the Kingsguard. And I think they just stopped trying to conquer Dorne after the horrible defeat of Meraxes and Rhaenys. I think Aegon was really upset about that and just said, fuck them, leave them alone for a while, basically. But then they, in like 157 AC, another conquest attempt was made by King Daeron I. And eventually in 158, Sunspear submitted. But they've subsequently rebelled, and they've sort of been in and out of the kingdom after a series of Dornish wars and things like that. So pretty interesting and storied history. So they eventually gave up their kingship of their sovereign territory in Dorne and submitted to the Seven Kingdoms, but they remained the sons of the kings remained princes, basically. So they kept their princehood for eternity, interestingly. So imagine how things may have played out if Tywin had survived, since we know he recognizes the reality of the Targaryen dragon threat at this point. The sparrows would never have been an issue because that would not have flown with Tywin being alive.
No.
Tommen wouldn't have been so easily manipulatable. The Seven Kingdoms may have been galvanized to repel Dany and her dragon spawn. Like, imagine how crazy that could have been.
Oh, man. For sure.
She arrives to a kingdom in ruin, basically. But I bet that if Tywin had taken, control with Tommen, that the Seven Kingdoms would not have been in the same shape that they were to greet her.
No, I agree.
Dorne may have been part of the Seven Kingdoms. Like if Oberyn took this deal and didn't die, then he would have been on the small council. They would have had a stake in what happens in King's Landing, and she wouldn't have, through Varys got in the Dornish army with Ilaria and the crazy girls and whatnot.
That's true.
It's like her main first army that joins her when she shows up to Westeros. So.
Fire and blood.
Yeah.
That's what Varys says.
Yeah.
It comes out.
Moment.
Fire and blood.
Yep, that was so cool. So Oberyn responds, and of course, like, he can't resist rubbing it in where he can, taking a jab at Tywin. You're saying you need us. That must be very hard for you to admit. So that was kind of funny. Oberyn's like, or Tywin's like, but then he pulls it together. Well, we need each other. You help me serve justice to the king's assassins, and I'll help you serve justice to Elia's.
Yeah, and I found that really interesting. Again, I don't necessarily believe Tywin that he would give up the mountain to Oberyn, but maybe Tywin is so overly confident in the mountain that he isn't really worried. But
interesting little nod to the books kind of there, because actually on the TV show as well, remember they send a head to Dorne, don't they? That they're claiming as the mountain's head.
Is that in? I think that's in the books.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's not in the show. I know that for a fact.
Okay, yeah. They basically claim that they're, Tywin sends the mountain's head, like, yeah, this is the mountain, he's dead, after the whole poisoning Oberyn fight thing, like, here's his head. But in reality, we know that the mountain is being turned into Monster Man by Qyburn. So he hasn't really given him up. So.
Oh, yeah. Interesting.
So it's interesting there. Oberyn has a moment where he sees opportunity for justice for Elia, but he's also wary of being used as a pawn in Tywin's machinations, So he looks kind of conflicted there while he's considering his options at the end of the scene. But yeah, very good scene overall. We learn a lot. There's some interesting philosophy and stuff like that getting thrown around. So good stuff.
Yeah, and again, we talked about this a little bit last episode of like the game of words.
Yeah, love it.
And the game of wit. And we have two extremely smart, I will say like worldly men.
Yeah, definitely.
Tywin's been around a long time. Oberyn has traveled the world. He's studied at the Citadel.
Very worldly.
Yeah, he's spent time in Lys and just spent times with the Second Sons. And Tywin, he's been around a while. He's been at King's Landing a while. He's been a part of a few different dynasties. Mm-hmm. So their different perspectives are just really, it's nice to see their dynamic.
Yeah, it's really cool to see those totally different experiences clash with each other, and the way that they attack and dodge each other's sort of moves in this whole chess game. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, like Tywin is very stoic. He's very still. He's very calm and collected and very kind of strict and by the book. And this is the way things are, like your typical kind of Westerosi vibe.
Yeah.
And Oberyn is free-flowing.
Total opposite.
Just the total polar opposite of
drinking
Tywin.
wine before his fights,
Yeah, and like, having his paramour and the orgies and traveling around the world and basically kind of doing whatever he wants because he doesn't really have that responsibility of, being the Prince of Dorne. But he is, because he's a second son. So
right. Doran does all that princely stuff.
Yeah. So it's a great ebb and flow to that conversation and different perspectives of two very different, but in a way very similar men in the fact that they're both highly educated.
Highly dangerous as well.
Highly dangerous men, exactly.
Yeah, there's even that part where he's like, Tywin says to him, like, I'm alone right now. I'm here, unprotected. Like, why haven't you killed me? And he's like, I think you know me better than that.
Yeah, like I have amazing. My wits about me. I have self-control.
I could kill you today and be, what does he say? Be tortured tomorrow, or whatever he says. Yeah, he understands what's going on. He's going to get away with it if he does something,
Yeah, exactly.
And the trial by combat with the mountain provides the perfect avenue for him to kill the mountain and get away with it if he's successful, too. So that's awesome. So what's your number 3?
My number 3 is the Meereenese knot starts to tangle.
Nice.
Yeah, so we see Dany approaching Meereen.
Nice.
And this is the start of the long, drawn-out Meereenese story with Dany that, you know,
yeah.
Some people love it.
My number 3 is Daario versus Meereen's champion, too. So
Awesome.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, so we'll collaborate. So I loved the doors to Meereen.
Oh, yeah, so cool.
They are so big. Like, they open.
It looked like Alice in Wonderland, you know, where there's like one big door and then like a tiny little door at the bottom.
Yes, because out pops this little teeny tiny champion.
Yeah, you think like these gates are going to open, and it turns out that they're really way bigger than they look.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, he comes storming out, and, you know, Dany's like, are we under attack? And, you know, Jorah goes into, it's the champion of Meereen, and we need to pick a champion. And, you know, the champion's over there peeing and just talking shit. And I like how each of her kind of main guys stand up, and Jorah's kind of the first one to talk, and she goes, Grey Worm is the first to talk, and he goes, you know, let me stand and fight for you. I won't let you down. And she goes, I can't risk you. You're the captain of the Unsullied. You're an important part of my army. And then Barristan, you know, I've killed more men in single combat than anyone. And she goes, that's why you have to remain by my side. I need a seasoned fighter like you in my Kingsguard. And then Jorah, you know, he goes, I'll fight for you. And she goes, no, you're a trusted advisor, because she doesn't know that he's betrayed her in the past, which I found kind of interesting that she said trusted advisor and my dearest friend, which she's totally putting him in the friend zone again.
Oh, brutal. Yeah. I didn't even catch that.
And then Daario steps up and he's like, I was the last to join. You know, I came from nothing. I'll return to nothing. And she's like, yep, go for it. Just like totally just like brushes it off. She's like, okay.
Yeah, pretty convincing argument he made.
Yeah.
I'm totally qualified for this. My mother was a whore. I came from nothing. I'll go back to nothing. I'm the man for the job.
And she's like, yep, okay, go for it. You know, whatever. She has all these like huge reasons to keep all the other 3. And she doesn't even say like, I don't know. She's like, very well then. And, you know, she asks him like, do you want a horse? And he's like, no. And she goes, why? And, horses are dumber than men. And we get to see his booby knife.
Yeah, one of his ladies.
Kiss his boobies.
Yeah, they're referred to as Daario's ladies in the
ladies,
in the books.
Yes. Yeah, so, you know, he kisses the knife and the champion's, you know, galloping up towards him. And it's kind of intense because the champion is running straight towards Dany.
With a fucking lance. Yeah, right at Dany. Like, if he rides right through Daario, he's riding right into Dany.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of weird the way Daario positioned himself.
Mm-hmm.
Even with confidence, maybe I would have just, like, gone at a little bit of an angle just in case. So we're not, like, screwing off our queen.
Totally. And Dany betrays her feelings at this moment, too. As the guy's charging towards Daario, he sort of turns and looks at her and sees how worried she is for him. And he winks at her, and he knows that he's got her at that point.
Yeah, and so, you know, he chucks the knife into the horse's eye, which is intense, and the horse falls. And the guy, okay, I've fallen off a horse a few times in my life.
Damn.
Just a few. And it hurts. And it's a bit disorienting, especially if you don't know, like, which way you fell.
Right, and he tumbles, like, 4 times.
Yeah, so he's kind of, like, stumbling to get up and was like, what the fuck just happened? And he goes to turn and his head just gets lopped right off. Yep. I mean, it's, like, not even a contest.
Yeah, and that's the best part about it, too, is that Daario is so fucking good that all he needed was his ladies. You know, he tossed the knife into the horse's head. The horse tumbles at the perfect distance away where the guy falls off and rolls right up to Daario, and Daario doesn't even need to move. He just slashes down with the Eric.
It's pretty impressive, and I think Dany was very impressed because she kind of like smiles and walks away, and she's like, yeah, he's a keeper.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Oh, so, man.
You know, we kind of continue, and all of the Meereenese people are like, oh my God,
Becky,
what just happened? They're all kind of in shock.
It's pretty much silence in the peanut gallery.
Yeah, the masters are silent. The slaves are silent. They're just kind of like looking down at this little silver-haired girl who... Oh, I forgot to mention Daario pees.
Oh, yeah, true.
I loved that.
The guy pees all over like Dany symbolically, and then Daario pees back at him.
Yeah.
So
and
funny.
I love how Dany goes into her, you know, speech, and I love that she says to the slaves, I'm not speaking to your masters, I'm speaking to you.
Yeah.
And that's very strong because no one speaks to the slaves.
Right. I have nothing to say to them, to your masters.
Yeah, I have nothing to say to your masters. I'm speaking to you. And, you know, she goes into, I went to, where's the first city that she visited?
Astapor. With Krasny's Monastis.
Yeah, and all of these men that stand behind me, they're free. Then I went to Yunkai, and all of the people standing behind me are free. Now I'm coming to Meereen, and basically I'm going to free you. And I loved this, the symbol of her kind of chucking the barrels of the collars and having them break all over the ground.
Yes, she's not destroying the buildings either, like, which is cool. Like, she isn't bringing destruction, she's bringing...
But, like, what if one of those barrels hit somebody?
Yeah.
Like, what if it hit a slave? It would be, like, horrible.
Heads up! Whoop!
Yeah, because she shoots, like, she shoots, what, like, half a dozen?
Yeah.
6, 12 of them?
Yeah, something like that.
And they're going fast. And, I mean, they're breaking. There's wood splintering everywhere. There's chains falling everywhere. And I'm just glad nobody was hurt.
Yeah, it's cool, too, that slave picks up a collar and he sees it's the same thing that's around his neck. And he knows that it's real because you can see the sweat stains, you know, of the previous owner, and that the leather is worn. And it makes him think, and he looks back at his master, you know, and it's like, oh,
yeah, and it's the same exact collar that he's wearing around his neck too. I mean, it's identical, and
proof.
You can just see his wheels are turning, and you know, obviously this episode is named "The Breaker of Chains," and we know that Dany, that's one of her titles. But I found it very interesting because at the beginning of this episode, we see Tyrion being taken away and put into chains.
Ah, yes.
And at the end of the episode, we really see Dany kind of entering that moment of being the actual breaker of chains. She's in Meereen. She's in the biggest city in Slaver's Bay. She's coming to conquer it and free the slaves. She has all of these collars that are broken. And that's how we end the episode. So nice little bookends about Tyrion getting into chains and Dany breaking chains. And, you know, again, that's kind of a nice little coup because they end up together.
And she sort of ends up breaking his chains as well because he was a slave at the fighting pits before she pulled... Yeah, she like pulls him and Jorah out basically. So she basically ends up breaking his chains, which is cool.
That's right. So I just, any scene with Dany in it's usually pretty good. And I can't remember, has she been addressed yet as a title being the Breaker of Chains, or is this where she gets that title and is now addressed as the Breaker of Chains?
I think it's from this point moving forward.
That's what I thought too. I couldn't remember when she goes to meet, when the Astapor guy comes to meet her in the tent, if Missandei says Breaker of Chains. I don't think she does, but I can't remember.
And she also doesn't say it when all the people of Yunkai come out in the Misa episode.
Oh yeah, that she doesn't say it there either. So I think this is from this point on, that is a title added to her titles.
Yep. Oh man. So at the end there, when she's talking and she's like, I've nothing to say to your masters. I speak only to you. And she starts listing off all the places. I'm surprised that the masters that we're all listening to let that conversation continue. Dany is like so far away that I would think, and they know what she's done, freeing slaves in other places. You'd think that they would start like just making noise so that nobody can, so none of the slaves can hear her propaganda. It's foreign propaganda. The slaves, the collars that she launched against our buildings, that's because she killed the slaves that used to be wearing those. That's what they should be telling their slaves. Like, don't trust her. She's gonna kill you.
I think they're kind of overwhelmed, though. I mean,
right? They don't even know what to do.
I think they're in shock because there's a ton of Unsullied right there. There's a lot of free people outside that would, maybe not are trained fighters, but I think they would be willing to fight for their freedom if they had to. Mm-hmm. And she just like without hesitation killed supposedly the best fighter in Meereen. In single combat. Like, it wasn't even a contest.
So that guy, we got more information about him in the books. Osnak Zopal is his name. He's the champion of Meereen. So, hilariously, Dan Weiss, one of the showrunners for Game of Thrones, had the great idea to basically have this Meereenese champion be quoting the French knight, taunting the English knights in Monty Python. So if you translate the Low Valyrian of what this knight is saying, he's saying, "I fart in your general direction, son of a window dresser. Your mother was a hamster and your father smelt of elderberries. Go and boil your bottom, son of a silly person. I wave my private parts at your aunties. I don't want to talk to you no more, you empty-headed animal food trough wiper. I blow my nose at you, so-called dragon queen, you and all your silly Westerosi kniggets." We get two references to the same Monty Python joke in this one episode as Shireen is schooling Davos not to pronounce knights as kniggets when he's reading it. So it's brilliant. And yeah, in the books, it's a different. Dany has a different champion that fights him in the books, which is interesting.
Oh, it's not Dario?
Yeah, it's a different guy, Strong Belwas, which is cool. But yeah, he's like a revered fighter in Meereen, so it's kind of funny that he's taken out so easily.
That's very interesting.
And was it Barristan who said that he's won more single combats than anybody?
Yes, Barristan has won more single combats than
That's badass.
anyone.
Fucking Batman.
He is Batman.
He really is. It's so cool. Yep. Oh man, I love that scene. That's like one of the greatest scenes of the show. It's crazy too, because Dany's like, "Well, get a horse," and he's like, "I don't need a horse," And she says, "Horses are faster than men." And he says, "Horses are dumber than men." And it's like that horse is he's Rickonning it up. He's running straight at Dario.
He's not zigzagging.
Yeah, it makes an easy target for that knife throw. Yeah, should have zigzagged, horse. So we can say Rickon's as dumb as a horse, I guess.
Oh my goodness. Hey, you know what? Then I am too, because I wouldn't think to zigzag if someone was trying to shoot me with a bow and arrow. I would have just ran for dear life. I'd
be like rolling and like ducking and all kinds of crazy shit.
You're smarter than me, Duncan.
Oh man. I don't know about that. I've seen the Rickon episode, So.
Well, now I know. If anyone's ever trying to shoot me with a bow and arrow, I'm zigzagging for sure.
Exactly.
So that's kind of all of my notes for my number 3. What is your number 3?
Mine was the same thing, and we pretty much covered that pretty well. So yeah.
So we covered my number 2, which was Tywin and Tommen. So what is your number 2?
My number 2 is There Never Lived a More Loyal Squire.
Oh, Pod.
Oh, Pod. So Pod, of course, goes to visit Tyrion in his cell. And Tyrion hilariously apologizes for the stench. Something about the word stench is just really funny.
It's wrong.
So
It's like the word moist.
classic. So Podrick tells him, I brought you some wine, but they took it from me, and we know that Tyrion is a wine drinker. He drinks and he knows
you're a good
things.
lad.
Yeah, a noble effort, he says, which I thought was
that's right, a noble
line.
effort.
And he managed to smuggle some stuff in because he said they didn't find the candles. So he brings them a quill, some parchment, some duck sausage, not dick sausage like Ramsay eats, almonds, and some hard cheese. And I'm like, damn, Podrick is the man, because that all sounds pretty awesome, like pretty awesome stuff to have,
Yeah.
So Tyrion asks of Shay. There's no word about her. He basically tells Podrick, like he asks Podrick what's being said out there, and he says, "You're to stand trial in a fortnight for murdering the king." And he's like, "Do you believe I murdered Joffrey?" He's like, "No, my lord. You didn't though, right?" He's got to double check, which is hilarious. He's like, "No, gods, no, I didn't do that," And Tyrion has some great lines here that, like we said earlier, that he'd be smarter than to plan it so he's gawking like a fool. The world is a better place without him, but I had nothing to do with it. I would like to think if I were arranging a royal wedding, a royal assassination, I'd plan it in such a way that I wouldn't be standing there gawking. Yeah, he would have been long gone. Or
Yeah,
nowhere
he would have been
near it.
Sansa.
Yeah, totally. So he goes on to tell Tyrion that Oberyn is going to be part of the jury, or the judges, one of the judges. And Tyrion mentions that his father never fails to take advantage of a family tragedy. So he understands that he's trying to get Dorne into the fold. And it reminds me of a quote. Someone said, "Never let a serious crisis go to waste." And people do this. They harness tragedies and whatnot to push their own goals. It's pretty crazy. And some people even create crises for the same purpose, to push a goal after. Problem, reaction, solution paradigm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he finds out that Sansa is gone, and Podrick's like, "You don't think she," and Tyrion is like, you can see his brain going through the motions. He's surprised that she's gone and that she's fled and hasn't been seen since the wedding. But he also sees through the deception and knows that even though no one had more cause to kill Joffrey than Sansa, she's not an assassin,
No, she's not capable of doing that.
Yeah, and whoever did it wanted him to lose his head for it. Mm-hmm.
And I like how he theorizes that at this point, maybe it's Tywin, because like we said earlier, Tommen is much easier than Joffrey.
Right. Like I mentioned that last episode too, that he was one of my suspects because it makes sense for him to eliminate Joffrey.
Definitely.
And given like what a ruthless Machiavellian pragmatist he is, it's the most practical thing is to have Tommen as the king, in order to accomplish his goals, at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then it was interesting too how he runs through Cersei's psychology and decides that there's no way that Cersei could have been a part of it because, no matter how horrible she is, like you say, that her one relatable character is that she's like a mother and she loves her children. So
this makes it unique as far as King's Landing murders go.
Yeah, she's the only one I'm certain had nothing to do with this murder, which makes it unique.
Totally.
Hilarious. Well, he's more certain than I was because she was on my list of suspects.
I mean, Tywin was more on my list when I first watched the royal wedding or the purple wedding. I never thought Cersei would do that.
Right.
And I think with the camera angles, watching it, as many times as I have in the past, the camera angles lead you to kind of believe that maybe Cersei has something to do with it, but her gut-wrenching reaction to watching her son die, you just know that that's not acting.
Yeah, she's really surprised.
She's horrified and like looking around for help and angry and screaming, and I mean she's crying. Cersei is crying. Okay, like let's take that in for a minute.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Cersei doesn't cry.
Yeah.
So she was never on my list, but Tywin certainly was on my list of
Definitely
possible suspects for sure.
Especially like now that we know that that it was Olenna and everything, we see them kind of like walking together in the gardens and interacting occasionally. It wouldn't, if there was one thing that they have in common, it's probably that they did. But neither one of them wanted Joffrey to be king. That could have been common ground in an assassination plot, theoretically. So Tyrion is running through his options here. He's like, well, Sansa's not an option for my defense. What about Varys? He could speak out on my behalf if he dared. But nope, he's already been called to be a witness for the queen. And then Bronn is being prevented from visiting Tyrion as well, and he's under investigation, which sucks. He's like, what the fuck, Tyrion? Like, why you got to get me investigated, man?
I know.
Hilarious. And Jaime is absent, and then Podrick, in a moment of true loyalty, tells Tyrion that somebody has approached him and has said he would be named a knight if he tells the judges that Tyrion bought a poison called the Strangler. And he says there was a man, he doesn't know his face, but he asked if he'd testify against him. And I think maybe it was Qyburn.
Oh, you think? Or Pycelle?
He would have known Pycelle because they've both been King's Landing for a long time.
That's true.
But Qyburn was a recent arrival. And now he's like doing Cersei's bidding, basically, as we found out.
Yeah,
a couple episodes.
That's a good guess. I like going with that theory.
Thanks. Yeah, so I definitely think that it was Qyburn, which is makes sense. And then in this is one of the most like gut wrenching or like heart wrenching scenes of the season or of the whole series for me, as Tyrion tells Podrick that. That he will not have him dying on his behalf. And he had asked Podrick if he gave them a response, and he says they didn't he didn't answer yet, right? He basically tells him you have to do what you're told, because if they can't tempt you with honey, they'll choose something less sweet, which is a funny line. Like they'll fucking kill you, man.
Or torture you until you agree.
Right. So he says that he doesn't want to walk to the if I have to take that long walk to the executioner's block, I don't want to see your head already mounted. Which is amazing. He's willing to condemn himself with a false testimony to prevent Podrick from experiencing injustice. It just shows you what a selfless character Tyrion is, and how he is one of the good guys,
Definitely.
So that's a powerful moment.
I was actually thinking while you were just talking, about Qyburn, and I know in the books, Varys is known to dress up as homeless people, or wear wigs and wear weird costumes.
Maybe a jail keeper, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it could have. This might be right down Sir Patrick's alley as far as Varys betraying Tyrion. But I know that he was known to dress up, and Varys has already been called as a witness against Tyrion.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
definitely an option as well.
You do see him wear some hooded cloaks in the show, but it isn't mentioned in the show as much as it is in the books of all his different costumes.
Right. He's like a veritable master of disguise in the books.
Yes. So, while I agree from a show perspective that it's likely Qyburn, but I think Varys could be a suspect as well, just based off what I know in the books.
Definitely. I agree. So Podrick is heartbroken by this as well. He's like, Podrick, I'm giving you an order, you have to do what they tell you, basically. And then he tells him to go find his brother and get yourself out of King's Landing before it's too late. Pod, this is farewell. And Podrick has the saddest look on his face.
He's so sad. He's
farewell,
like a sad little puppy.
Yeah. And that's when he starts to walk out, and Tyrion stops him. Pod, There's never lived a more loyal squire, which is a great line. Really sums up Pod. Yeah, he's a giver. I believe it.
He pours a really good cup of wine.
Yeah, totally. And he gives Brienne the best massages after long days of battle. I'm sure.
Oh yeah, because he's a sex prodigy.
Hey, your head was in the gutter there. I was just talking about how he ends up being with Brienne.
Oh, okay.
Or was I?
I was just like, I don't know. Maybe they hook up.
No,
we'll
I'm
see.
just kidding. It was an innuendo. But it's just funny how I was like how he ends up loyally serving Brienne, and she's like, "Go away! I don't need a squire," and he just like will not go away. So he really is like loyal to a fault. It's funny.
Yes, he's has a servant's heart.
Yeah, willing to put himself in danger here for Tyrion. I mean, Tyrion's done a lot for him, so it's not like really a surprise that he would be willing to stick his neck out for Tyrion. But still, he's Pod.
Yeah, Tyrion's done a lot for him, but at the same time, squires don't get paid either. So it's not like Tyrion was paying him to be his squire. I just think Pod and Tyrion enjoyed each other's company, and it was a great relationship. And if I'm not mistaken, Tyrion and Pod don't see each other again until Tyrion comes back to King's Landing with Dany.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think that's the next time that they see each other. So it's quite a long time between now and that episode.
Yeah, what a great reunion, though.
Yes, because Pod and Bronn are together, and Tyrion walks up, and they're all kind of walking along together with Brienne.
I bet they're all so glad that each other are alive,
Yeah, they're kind of on opposite sides at this point in season 7, because Tyrion's with Dany, and obviously Bronn has been in King's Landing, and Pod has been with Brienne. But, you can tell that they're all relieved to see each other again. It's like old friends reconnecting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty wild. That pretty much covers all of my notes for that scene. Anything else you want to add before we move on?
Nope, I think that's good.
All right, then what is your number one?
So my number one was Tywin and Oberyn, and I know we discussed that scene in great detail. So
great. So let's jump into notes.
Oh, what was your number one? I can't remember.
Oh, my number one was fair wages for fair work.
Oh, okay. So Haria.
Yeah, around.
Or around. Around. Okay.
Around could be confused for a preposition, so Haria makes more sense.
Haria. Yeah, so what are some of your notes?
Let's see. So we get to hear some dialogue between Margaery and Lady Olenna. And Olenna has some great quotes. She's trying to make Margaery feel better about the whole situation. We covered that a little bit before, but she has some precious lines about her ex-husband, who she calls a great doughy lump. I'd sat next to at endless dinners and tedious gatherings, which I thought was...
And suffered through fathering my children.
Yep, just hilarious. A great doughy lump. She's so funny, man. So they're talking about how she's like kind of queen, it's funny too, because the Queen of Thorns is like queen in name, but not actually queen. And Marjorie's kind of like in that same position now, where she's like, technically she's the queen, but she's like not really the queen, Cersei's running everything. So there's a cool little parallel there between those two queens. And they're talking about their alliance with the Lannisters and how it's in a precarious position, but it remains every bit as necessary for Lannister as it is for them, and as unpleasant as it is for both of us, which is hilarious. She says, "You did wonderful work on Joffrey. The next one should be easier." And she does learn so much from Olenna. Olenna is her mentor and her closest confidant and everything. I like their relationship. It's
I
cool.
do too. It's a great dynamic.
Yep. And we've talked about this before in the podcast, but take a look at, a picture of Natalie Dormer next to a picture of Diana Rigg, who plays Olenna when she was younger, and they look very, very similar.
Yes, it's the cheekbones.
Yeah. So they definitely hired Diana Rigg and Lady Marjorie, Natalie Dormer together, knowing that they had looked very similar in their youth, which made the casting all the more powerful because it gives you a convincing, resemblance for the family, which is cool.
Absolutely.
What about you? You got any notes you want to talk about?
I do. I have Sam the Slayer.
Yeah.
So
there he is, Sam the Slayer.
This is, I think, the first time we hear the actual term Sam the Slayer in a mocking way.
Totally.
We know when he becomes Sam the Slayer, but this is the first time as a watcher that we hear Sam the Slayer, and it's being used obviously as a derogatory statement coming from slimy Janos Slynt, who, from previous episodes, we know he's never been north of the wall. He does not really believe in what they're holding the wall against, essentially, which is the dead.
Yeah.
And I noted that Janos is following Sir Alistair Thorne around like a little pup. Just like, he reminded me, this is horrible. He reminds me of like a nerd at school trying to get in with like the popular crowd.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Like he's scurrying to, find a clique to be a part of, and
not just a clique, the clique of like who he thinks is going to be running the joint.
Exactly. So it cuts over to Gilly and Sam, which is another pairing in this kind of overall theme of pairs that I kind of picked up on.
Nice, right.
And, Sam's making sure that she's safe, and she's like, well, I'm getting looked at and I hear them making their jokes, but no one's touched me.
He's like, I just know that they're all lying there at night thinking about you, picturing you. And she's like, well, what about you? Like, are you picturing me?
And he's like, Gilly? So, I know that in this scene, Sam is concerned about Gilly's safety. There's 100 men, there's one woman, and, she's not horrible looking, but this is the first time that Sam suggests that maybe she's safer somewhere else.
And it's sort of parallels Tyrion sending Shay away for her safety as well, just the previous episode.
And
Pod, too, true.
Yeah, man. I did like that she was pretty positive. She's like, and nobody's touched me. That's a good thing, And, they're plucking feathers off the goose, and she realizes in that moment that, she thinks that Sam is bored of her and trying to get rid of her, and it's actually quite the opposite. He's
infatuated.
He's very concerned for her well-being. This is not a safe place for many reasons. I mean, we have wildling armies marching on the wall.
From both directions.
We have the dead, which Sam and Gilly have both seen. And they're actually that White Walker is fairly close to the wall, if I'm not mistaken, because Craster's Keep is not terribly far away from the wall. It's a general stopping point between the wall and the far north. So it's close. I mean, I'm not sure of the distance of Craster's Keep. I'd have to look at a map, but
it's certainly relatively close.
It's relatively close to the wall, and she gets very sad because it's like, oh, you're sending me away. I guess you're just done with me. And it's the total opposite. He's just looking out for her, but she clearly doesn't see it that way. And she's like, I'm going to go give these gooses to, what's his name? I forget his name. The cook.
Hob.
Hob. Yes. Hob. And, you know, you watch over little Sam, and she just kind of like slinks away. And you can tell that Sam is upset with himself.
Mm-hmm. So would this be love over duty or duty over love?
I think it's
or
a little
both.
bit of. I think it's a little bit of both, because
yeah, equally.
He says to her, you know, I can't really protect you here because I can't stab my fellow brothers in the back.
Yep. Yeah, good point.
And I can't run away like we did at Craster's. So my hands are kind of tied here, and you're in danger. And he does love her. So I think it's kind of both, because he has taken his oath, which he takes extremely literally, but he, you know, abides by it just in a more literal sense. But at the same time, he's trying to protect her. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, I would say that love and duty both have the same result in this case.
Yeah, I think Sam is feeling that he has a duty of a man of the Night's Watch, but also a duty because the Night's Watch, as we have heard him say to Maester Aemon, guards the realms of men. That includes her.
Yep.
And also he loves her, so...
Yeah. Speaking of the other realm of the wildlings, she has a funny line a little bit earlier on where he basically says, "What, you know, he's saying they think I'm lying, you know, about what? Killing the White Walker. You're not lying. I'll never forget the way it screamed, but you're the only one that saw it, you know, and they all think you're just a what? Well, a wildling."
Wildling.
Yeah, she says, "My father hated that word," and Sam's like, "Well, it's not a very nice word, I suppose." And I like her response, "I don't know. It makes me sound a bit dangerous, doesn't it?"
Yeah, that's so cute.
Yeah, that's classic.
Yeah, so, you know, that kind of takes us to Molestown,
Yep.
which is not a nice place.
Yeah, you could say that.
That whore is freaky.
She's fetching.
Like, she gives me the heebie-jeebies. You know, and she's trying to figure out Gilly, and she's touching the baby, and being a mom with an infant like that,
You're like, "Don't touch my baby."
It's very unnerving when people touch your small infant like that without asking. Like, it happens more often than not, and I tried to be fairly lenient about it, but it did bother me a lot when it happened. So you can kind of see her like tense up a little bit, and just a tiny bit of body language, which I thought was amazing acting.
Yeah, definitely.
Done by, you know, she kind of tenses up and just slightly turns her body away, but doesn't do it to the fact where it's offensive and noticeable to the lady that was touching the baby.
Right, like I've seen Battlestar Galactica. I knows what happens when strangers touch your baby.
So, you know, and she's like, "You pretty little thing," and, you know, "Where are you from?" And Gilly's like, "Oh no,
I'm north of here."
North of here. And she's like, "North of here?" Because there's nothing north
You're
of
a
Molestown.
fucking wildling.
Oh, and she's so gross. She's such...
We get to
Ugh.
see more of her, like, in the future, right?
Yeah, she burps the bear and the
Entertaining
maiden
too.
bear.
Yeah, that was great.
So, you know, while she's having this conversation with the whore...
She's, like, horribly awesome, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I mean, she plays it so well. I mean, she's wretched looking. I mean, she's just rode hard and put away wet.
oh,
It's bad. You know, and while Gilly is kind of fending off this creepy lady, Sam is talking to...
I called her creepy in my notes, too.
Yeah, the brothel keeper, who has a black eye, mind you.
Oh, shit. I didn't notice.
And, you know, she's like, and she can cook and clean and take care of the other women's babies. And, you know, she's like, you know, we have other work. Like, there'd be money
No
in it.
other
I'd
work.
give you no other work.
Give you a piece
No
of
other
it.
work. Oh, and then it cuts right after Sam says that. I think they're cleaning out, like,
A condom! Yeah! I noticed that too. I had that in my notes. I have gross! Looks like the wench on the left of the screen is washing out the condom. It's gross.
Yes, it's so gross. And
it's hilarious. It's probably like made of intestines or something.
Yeah, I would assume so. It's not pleasant to look at. They're cleaning it out, which means it's being reused.
Yeah. You gotta reuse them back, in that kind of circumstance.
Yeah, so that's disgusting.
It's hilarious. It's also super, super gross. That's so funny we both noticed that. I don't know if I've ever really noticed that before.
I've noticed it a couple of times, but I never really thought past they were washing something out. And then until the rewatch, I was like, oh, that's a condom.
Yeah.
So
hilarious.
I found it extremely sad and very tense when Sam's trying to say goodbye to Gilly because she's very mad at him. She's in this wretched place that is
it's pretty gross.
Clearly not really taking care of it. Molestown serves one purpose, and that's to serve the men of the Night's Watch. And
basically.
So it's really not a place to raise children or live like a normal, non-whore life.
Yeah.
So I think she's...
non-whore life. I bet he would have tried to send her to Winterfell or something, but it's burned.
Yeah. And Winterfell is still fairly far away. So I think in the interim, he's like, I can't go very far because we're about to be under siege. Molestown is safer. It's, probably half a day's ride, whereas I think Winterfell is 3 or 4 days away.
Little does he know he puts her right in the wildling's path.
Oh, big time. So, I thought it was really sad. Little Sam starts crying as Big Sam leaves.
Wait, you mean Sam's dick or the baby? Because I think Sam's dick was a little bit sad there too, that Gilly was going to be gone.
Both.
his fat pink mast, as the books call it.
Oh, my goodness.
It's true. They have the sex scene on the show.
Yeah.
That it's just in the book's version, it's described as a fat pink mast.
Okay, so it's like Chody.
It's hilarious.
This is getting way too creepy. Yeah, it's a sad scene.
Yeah, it's really sad. She's so mad she won't even look at him.
Yeah, well, I would be too.
And he's like, "Oh, Gilly, please don't.
I know.
You have to trust me. Sam. It's for the best."
And then cue wildling attack next episode.
Yeah, and next scene.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think the wildlings show up at Ollie's village.
Yeah, we meet Ollie this episode.
Who looks fucking terrified. He's a little shit, and most a lot of people didn't like the character in the later seasons, but he's pretty effective here at looking like a terrified little bitch. Which
I think he is. I mean, he's just walking next to his dad, talking about his mom
it's so
boiling
horrible.
Potatoes, and
it's so horrible.
They're looking forward to dinner that night, and it's just a normal everyday for them in this little tiny village. And
then whack!
His dad's died.
Arrow to the spinal column.
And then his mom, she's like, hide! And he's like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And he sees his mom die, and then
his face is all contorted.
I think Caroline Collins mentioned that. I think she's right that that's the Magnar of the Thens.
Yeah, it seems to be on the show, yeah.
I think she's right, at least in this, in the show.
He's definitely the boss of this crew of Thens, for sure.
Yeah, and so he's grabbing his face, and he's like, you see your parents over there? And they're, carving him up like
so
Thanksgiving
creepy.
Turkey. And she's like, I'm going to eat your dead mama, and I'm going to eat your dead papa. Open your eyes. Do you know where Castle Black is? Go tell the crows we're coming for him. And, Ollie is a little innocent boy at that point, but, going to the wall and being surrounded by men, kind of gruff men and dangerous men, I think he morphs kind of into that later character that people don't like very much.
Right. He idolizes the certain aspects of them without the full philosophical perspective, and he takes on like some certain of their characteristics that you wouldn't necessarily want a little kid to. Like he ends up stabbing Jon Snow, you know, for instance.
Yeah, and he's definitely grown more into more of a man in that when that occurs. But in this particular scene, you do feel for him. And
yep. Man, imagine being that actor, you know, like the Magnar there as he's like grabbing the kid's face and I'm going to eat your dead mama. And, you know,
So
that
gross.
scene in season 1 where Khal Drogo like kind of rapes Dany on their wedding night or something. Apparently, and she's crying during filming that, apparently in between all the takes, Jason Momoa would like lean over and be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, sorry we have to do that. You know? So
I'm
like,
so
"Are
sorry
you
I have
okay?
to
Are
grope you.
Yeah, are you okay, Amelia? You know, type thing. So I'm just picturing this Magnar of Then in between takes, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, like little.
I'm
boy,
not really talking
boy
about
actor.
your mom.
yeah. Like,
I do kind of feel for Ollie in the later seasons as well, because I think the age that he is at when he goes to the wall is an extremely impressionable age.
yeah, totally.
And he's just witnessed a terrible tragedy with his family and his whole village, for that matter. I mean, talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. And then he has his own preconceived notions of wildlings because they ruined his life. They decimated everything he knew and held dear. And then, you know, he kind of gets in with Alistair Thorne, and because they share the same sentiment as the wildlings. And I think he's just led down a path because he's impressionable and not logically making his own decisions about how he feels about this particular situation. He's projecting previous situations on the one that ends up, you know, stabbing Jon Snow with, which is completely natural and normal. It's just
annoying for the
exacerbated.
viewer.
Yeah, it's exacerbated because he's a teenager.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
And impressionable. You know, he's too young to rationally work through those thoughts and process them. And it's even difficult for adults to do.
Yeah, definitely.
So I agree that he's hard to like in the later seasons, but it's an unfortunate series of events that lead him to that because he's at such a young age.
Right.
When
And
it all goes down.
It's sort of also like understood that the people like the Ollie haters, you know what I mean? They're like those like the rabid like TV show viewers who are like have extreme views of stuff like fuck that little kid, you know? Like
of course.
bitch,
Like he's,
you know?
Yeah, he's completely just jumping
just
on
a
the
kid, man. Like,
the bandwagon and not really making logical decisions. So it's hard to like someone with no backbone.
Yeah, there's a little foreshadowing this episode too when he's hiding under the cart and he looks over yonder and sees Ygritte and sort of like it goes kind of like quiet and it focuses in on her, and it's just sort of foreshadowing how that same thing happens when he ends up killing Ygritte.
Yep,
at
that's
the wall.
right. And he kills her with a bow.
Yep, her own weapon, like not her bow like from her back, but the same weapon of choice. Which is brutal.
So fun fact in this scene, the music that's playing in the background as the wildlings attack this village, there is a horn that blows. It's a 40-foot horn.
What?
Yeah.
No way.
And the reason I know this is because I've gone to the Game of Thrones live concert experience, and they have this horn on stage, and it literally is 40 feet long.
That's so
and it
cool.
is loud as fuck.
That's fucking killer, man. I'm gonna have to pay attention to that
so
next
loud
time.
It's awesome. I think you'll hear it again when the wildlings attack Castle Black, because that's the scene that was playing on the big screen when they were
blasting it on stage. That's killer.
It's intense.
I'll have to look it up.
It's not as loud in the show because it would be like deafening, but in an enclosed arena, it was really loud. It was awesome.
40 feet. That's so cool.
It's a 40-foot horn, and they had like the circular stage, and there was the horn blower in the middle, and the horn wrapped around him like a snake.
Nice. That's sick.
And he like literally had to like push his whole body into blowing that horn.
Oh yeah,
it was intense. It was awesome.
That's really cool too, because in the books there's like dragon horns, like other horns that are like pretty intense to blow. So it's sort of like a little homage having like a crazy horn up on stage like that somebody's got to like really work to make some sound come out of.
Yeah, it's intense. It's like the world's biggest didgeridoo.
Sick. So at the beginning of this scene, when Ollie's dad gets shot in the spinal column, like right where it connects with the skull, it's horrible, but the timing is like hilariously comedic, kind of. Like the actor is like hamming it up too beforehand. He's like, well, no one boils a potato better than your mom, and like he's so into it, and then whack, like right in the back of the neck, and then the mom gets butchered on the spot too.
That was intense.
Yeah, it's just kind of funny a little bit also. I don't know if it's just me, but just like the timing or something made me laugh. But yeah, it's horrible. It's horrible, don't get me wrong.
It's pretty bad.
Oh man.
She's like telling her son to go run and hide, and then she just whacked.
Yeah, that Magnar's big ass battle axe just comes
That
crashing
is such
down.
an awesome weapon though.
Yeah, it is pretty cool, huh?
He is intense.
Yeah, he's big.
Whoever that actor is, he's big, and he plays that role perfectly. You couldn't ask for a better casting.
Yeah, he'd play a menacing skinhead, I bet.
He's intense for sure.
Yeah.
I just like his whole demeanor, the way he talks, the intensity of his eyes. He stays calm. I mean, they casted him perfectly.
Yeah, definitely. So Sir Alistair is actually right about something in this episode. He realizes that the wildlings are going to draw them out, and that's why they sent Ollie as a messenger to try to draw them out of Castle Black so they can pick them off a few at a time. And this is Ollie's first opportunity to be mad at Jon Snow about something. It's funny too, because Alistair doesn't like Jon Snow, but he knows Jon Snow is smart enough to know that Alistair is right about this decision. So he sort of calls on Jon Snow to bridge the gap between the divide of ideologies in the room. He's like, "You're a champion of the people, Jon Snow. What do you say to Brother Pip's proposition?" And Jon basically says, "Mance is coming, and we have to stop them. We can't, none of us can die before that." And so he chooses not to go avenge offensively Ollie's family, and that could be the first seed of dislike in Ollie about Jon Snow. But they're like kind of sitting together throughout this scene, which is interesting.
Yeah, and this scene is where we kind of learned that from Maester Aemon that there's just a little over 100 men, and that includes everybody, including Maester Aemon. Yeah,
who is definitely not somebody to call on for a sword fight.
No, and
he can't aim a bow very well.
To Jon's testament, he goes, they outnumber us like 100 to 1. And who is it? Is it it
would really be 1,000 to 1.
1,000 to 1. I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. 1,000 to 1. And he's like, I don't think I could kill 100 wildlings.
yeah. Foreshadowing his own death, just trying to kill one.
Yeah.
Poor
He
Pip.
kills one, and then I think he's reloading and gets.
I think you're right.
That's a painful death. Oof, Lord.
Thanks, Ygritte. Was it Ygritte that got him?
I'm not sure we know who gets him, because he's talking to Sam, and an arrow just comes whistling in and just gets him right in the neck. Yeah,
it's pretty vicious. Sam's like really sad by that too. So he makes a point that Carl and the other mutineers at Craster's Keep are aware of the truth of the numbers of the soldiers at Castle Black. And so whereas Alistair says justice can wait about going and getting revenge for Jorah Mormont, Jon says no. They know how many of us there are. And how long do you think they'll keep that information to themselves when the wildlings are peeling their fingernails off,
Yeah, Jon says Mance has all he needs to crush us, and he just doesn't know it yet.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good line. It's pretty fucked up. It's true. Man, yeah, just imagine if he sent people to climb the wall on both sides of Castle Black. He could have armies coming from the north, the south, and the east and the west on top of the wall, on the wall, you know?
Yeah, they wouldn't hold a candle. I mean, it would be over before it even really begins.
Yeah, there's a lot more cool details in the books of how they try to make it seem like Castle Black has more men than they really do. So you guys,
really?
Yeah,
like, do they put like scarecrows up and stuff?
maybe something like that. You'll have to read it though. It's pretty good.
Read the books.
Yeah.
This is also the scene where the Night's Watch learns that the Lord Commander is dead.
Oh.
So that's...
because Dolorous Ed shows up and spills the beans on the mutineers, huh?
And Gren, yeah. So,
right.
Because Alistair's like, what took you so long? And he's like, we were held up in chains.
Yeah. What held you back? Chains.
I mean, they didn't really say out front that Mormont was dead, but he called them the mutineers, and they all picked up on it instantly that that meant Mormont's dead.
Yeah, and even if it wasn't said explicitly there, it certainly was said off screen, like shortly thereafter, you know, off camera.
So now they know, and their Lord Commander is dead, and that's quite a ripple in the Night's Watch at a time that they need a leader.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Pretty brutal. So it's going to be fun watching Sam manipulate the scales and everything again to help Jon end up being named the Lord Commander in the upcoming scenes or, seasons.
Yeah.
Looking forward to seeing that again.
I always enjoy the scenes at the wall.
Yeah, me too, for sure. What other notes you have to talk about?
So I have just a couple more bullet points. I have Stannis and Davos.
Yeah, you're a literary man now. Stannis has some funny lines, man, but he never gets any credit for being funny as hell.
No, because they're so serious. It's like he says them, but there's no sense of humor behind it. Right. It's a serious statement.
Does he not know that they're funny? I don't know. I just think he's some of his lines are just so funny. He's got a couple in this episode too. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No. Go for it. So I love, again, this kind of echoes Melisandre's gloating about Robb Stark being dead. Stannis is gloating about Joffrey's death and tossing the leech into the fire.
True.
And, he's kind of digging at Davos and...
For setting free the bastard.
For setting him free. He's like, I have this primo position and I can't do anything about it because you let this one kid go. And Davos is like, well, I've gotten some houses to come to your aid, and he starts naming off the houses.
House Peasbury, House Musgood,
and he's ripping off sails of the boat and throwing them on the table. And they go. Stannis goes, combined.
They don't have enough men between them to raid a pantry.
I loved that. I just thought it was great. It's such a great line. So they keep talking, and I love how they're always arguing with each other, but there's a mutual respect, level of respect.
It's always constructive arguing.
Exactly. It's we're disagreeing to come to a solution.
Yeah. And
Davos is talking about sailing, to the east and paying some sellswords, and Stannis totally scoffs at that idea, and Davos goes, what, you're willing to win the throne using blood magic, but you're not willing to pay men to fight?
Yeah. Oh, it's a good point.
It is. And, he goes, and even if we don't have the gold to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And, Stannis is like, my time is now if I'm going to keep my claim to the throne alive.
Yeah, exactly.
I refuse to be a page in someone else's history book, which I thought was another great line, because then
definitely.
cut right over to Shireen and Davos, which is another little pairing.
Yep.
And Shireen is all over Davos about reading, and he's like, "You're relentless, the both of you."
Yeah. What does he say?
You and your father are
father's daughter,
relentless.
no mistake. Bloody
Yeah.
relentless.
It's true, because she's like all over him, and
You
know,
won't be a
she's
very
like,
good hand if you see the word knight and say "Nigget."
Nigget. She's so funny. So, you know, she calls him a pirate, and he corrects her, and, you know, she's like, "I don't really get the difference." And he's like, "Well, if you're a famous smuggler, you're not doing it right," which
Right.
is totally true.
My father says a criminal is a criminal.
Yeah, and he goes, "Your father lacks appreciation of the finer points of bad behavior."
Yeah, of the nuances of, of being bad. Oh, it's hilarious.
You know, again, Shireen is throwing a book at Davos, and now it's a book on Bravos.
Mm.
And I find it funny that the last sentence that Stannis says is, "I refuse to be a page in someone else's history book." And we cut over to Shireen, who's like kind of a history buff, who reads about other people.
And he was also talking about how they don't have enough gold. Like, we don't have any gold. How are we supposed to do anything?
So, as him and Shireen are kind of doing their cute little banter back and forth, which I love that it kind of mirrors his relationship with Stannis, just on a much, much lighter level.
It really does. Usually it doesn't really mirror his relationship with Stannis with Shireen,
No.
I don't think. But this one definitely does, this interaction.
Yeah, and I think it's because he's irritated
Yeah.
after talking to Stannis. He's like, "God, your dad is driving me up the wall." Like,
Yep.
he just you can't reason with the guy. And she's all over him like, "You're late. Like, you got to learn how to read. You got to learn how to do this." And he's like, "God, get off me." But then, you know, as they're talking, all of a sudden he gets this, it's like a light bulb goes off, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, the Iron Bank." And he's like, get a quill and paper. I need you to write this down." And she's like, "It's better if you do it." And he goes, "I need a smart person to do it for me right now."
Yeah.
I thought that was just so cute. So.
Yeah, it's so funny. It's great too. They're like having conversation about Bravos, and he's like, "I almost got beheaded by a first sort of Bravos." Tried to explain the difference between pirates and smugglers to him too, but he didn't see any more distinction than your father, which is funny. And then the Iron Bank just sort of casually comes up in conversation. You know, "I suppose if you work for the Iron Bank of Bravos, and each one of your gold barges is worth half a kingdom, you tend not to be overly concerned with this kind of distinction." And then that's when it hits him. Like he walks over, like walks away, and like has like an epiphany visually, and then comes back and kisses Shireen on the head. "What was that for?" Yeah.
He's like, "You're a genius."
Yeah. It's just kind of a cute moment. Like, she has sort of a funny little reaction to it, and
She's like, "What is happening?"
yeah, they just have a great dynamic. You know, I love the relationship between Davos and Shireen.
Me too. It's a really good one. So
Yeah, I need a smart person to do it for me. Oh, the other interesting thing is that he's dictating what to write to the officers of the Iron Bank and of Bravos, from Stannis Baratheon, the one true king of Westeros. And she says, "But that's not you. You know, like, you're not Stannis, the one true king." And he's like, I just need to get their attention. Go on, right? And it's just funny to me that Shireen like kind of goes along with this deception.
yeah, that's true. That's true. So yeah, you know, I try to find overlying themes to episodes, and I really do think we've touched on all of the pairings that I came across. And
Yeah, we pretty much touched on everything.
Yeah, Littlefinger and Sansa, Arya, Tywin and Tommen, Tywin and Oberyn, Pod and Tyrion, Cersei and Jaime, Stannis and Davos, Davos and Shireen,
Yep.
Sam and Gilly, Olenna and Marjorie.
Oh, and Gilly and the creepy whore.
Totally. So, do you have any other notes?
Nope, that pretty much covers everything.
Awesome.
Definitely. Same with you, huh?
I don't have any other notes.
Great. Okay. So let's take a little break and we'll be right back. And we're back with some news about Game of Thrones. First, from Express. Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin reveals where he would live in Westeros or Essos. By George Simpson. The fantasy book series is full of bustling cities, towns, and settlements, all created by Martin's imagination. But given the choice, just where would Game of Thrones author choose to live? Perhaps King's Landing, Winterfell, or even Volantis to the east, but surely not the Wall. Now, Martin has revealed the location of his choice in a new interview. Speaking with the New York Times, Martin said, I would probably... The free city of Braavos in Essos would be a cool place to live. According to the Game of Thrones wiki, Braavos is the northernmost, the richest, and arguably the most powerful of the free cities. Described as a city of seafarers and master swordsmen, Braavos consists of hundreds of tiny islands connected by stone bridges. That's cool. I knew there was like canals and stuff. I didn't realize there was a ton of islands.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Its main landmarks include the Titan of Braavos, which is like the sort of like the Statue of Liberty, or like the Titan at the massive Colossus of Alexandria, which was lost to time as well. And the city's famed Iron Bank, which is becoming more and more involved in our conversations these days, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Braavos is heavily inspired by some Renaissance European mercantile republics, of which Venice is the most famous.
From The Cut, Extremely Large Man Marries a Very Small Canadian Lady by Erica Smith. Thor Julius Bjornsson plays Sir Gregor Clegane the Mountain on Game of Thrones. More importantly, he is 6'9" and currently the strongest man in the world. Even more importantly, he got married this weekend in his native Iceland to a 5'2" Canadian bodybuilding woman named Kelsey Morgan Henson. According to TMZ, the two hit it off at a bar in Alberta after Henson asked for a picture with Bjornsson. Couples photos usually induce Liz Lemon grade eye rolls, but viewing pictures of these two together just makes you believe in love again. Take the wedding photo Bjornsson posted over the weekend, in which he writes, "I get to hold this beautiful woman through thick and thin for the rest of our lives. I'm so excited for all of the future adventures we will tackle side by side." It's cute because it's true. A review of both their glorious Instagram accounts proves that A, Bjornsson is really good at holding this beautiful woman in a variety of positions. And B, the two lovebirds are really good at tackling a variety of things, literally standing side by side. And a cheers to the happy couple and their recent nuptials. We've rounded up a handful of heartwarming pics that best represent this happily ever after. It's been a rough week for love. You deserve this.
And we'll post a link to facebook.com/GOM podcast of this so you guys can check out all the pictures.
I can't wait to see those. Yeah. That's funny. He's 6'9" and she's 5'2".
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Hilarious. So the next little tiny bit of news we have is Nespresso also released kind of a funny commercial featuring Natalie Dormer as a queen and with George Clooney wearing full plate armor, which is clearly a spoof inspired by Game of Thrones. It's just kind of a cool little watch. So we'll post that up on Facebook too for you guys.
Awesome. I can't wait to watch that. I'm sure it's funny.
Let's move on to Game of Thrones and history. Continuing on with our article from Ranker.com, Real Historical Figures Who Inspired Game of Thrones Characters by Tricia Sorayas Murray.
The Knights Templar is the Night's Watch.
Nice.
This is cool. I like the Knights Templar.
Yeah, me too.
The Knights Templar have a long and convoluted history that is as much myth as reality, similar to the Night's Watch and their tales of the Long Night. Knights Templar had to take an oath of chastity, poverty, and unending loyalty when they joined the order, and in return they were absolved of all prior sins. That's the exact deal that those who take the Black receive as well. Both groups are charged with protecting a realm against outside invaders, Westeros for the Night's Watch and the Holy Land for the Knights Templar, and both are led and elected by a leader who serves for life. Both would eventually fall into disrepute after storied histories.
That's cool. I really hadn't thought about this much before, so it's neat to see these two groups connected.
Yeah.
Mad King Charles VI is Mad King Aerys. There have been plenty of Mad Kings in history, but Westeros' most infamous maniacal monarch is most similar to Charles VI of France. Mad King Charles was known for his paranoid psychosis, which caused him to see enemies everywhere and punish them harshly. On one occasion, Charles executed several of his own knights because one of them accidentally dropped a lance. Damn. Mad King Aerys II of Westeros was prone to similar outbursts. Both kings had a connection with fire. Aerys was obsessed with it, and Charles VI was said to have been driven mad in part by a youthful incident that nearly saw him burned to death. Burn them all! Burn them all!
Okay, next is William the Conqueror is Aegon the Conqueror. The similarities between Aegon the Conqueror and William the Conqueror extend well beyond their boastful nicknames. Both figures were overseas invaders who bent an entire continent to their will. In the case of Aegon, it was Westeros, and for William, it was England. William may be considered the superior conqueror, as he did not have the benefit of 3 enormous dragons to aid his conquering. That would be a true statement.
Yeah. Unless you use the dragons as part of your calculation, in which case Aegon would be the superior conqueror, because nothing is going up against those dragons, except for Dorne, somehow.
Somehow, with their fireproof roofs. The historical parallels between the two isn't just obvious to readers. George R.R. Martin has straight up said Aegon's story was inspired by William.
Nice, interesting. Rasputin is Melisandre. A shady figure claiming magical abilities rises from poverty to ingratiate themselves within a royal family, gaining the trust of both the king and queen. Although the magic powers of this mysterious figure impress the royals, who increasingly rely on their guidance, the figure remains unpopular with the general public due to their extremist views. Plots are made to take this alleged magician out, but they demonstrate an uncanny ability to cheat death. Now, is this a description of Melisandre the Red Priestess, or Grigory Rasputin, a Russian mystic and also the subject of a disco classic? Nice. Very interesting.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah. They even look kind of similar.
Creepy.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Okay. Next, we have Genghis Khan is also Daenerys Targaryen.
Genghis, except Genghis had like 1 million babies.
Did he really?
Yeah, it's like 1% of all Asians are descended from Genghis Khan or something like that. Some ridiculous.
Oh my god, that's crazy.
Yeah,
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's like him and Wilt the Stilt for having sex with the most people.
Wow.
Yeah, Genghis would have sex with like 7 or more women a day or something like ridiculous.
That's insane.
Yeah. Sorry, just
no, that's funny. It's like, okay, you got nothing better to do, apparently.
Well, what better is there to do, really?
That's true. True statement. Okay. The Dothraki are obviously at least partially inspired by the Mongolian hordes of the Middle Ages. Like the Dothraki, the Mongolians were a militaristic people renowned for their prowess on horseback and their warrior culture. Also, like the Dothraki, the Mongolians were once scattered across the Eurasian steppe in small hordes until they were united by a charismatic leader bent on invading another continent. Genghis Khan and his Mongol Empire, unified in the 13th century, sought to expand into Europe, while Daenerys Targaryen set her eyes on Westeros. Thus far, it remains to be seen whose invasion will be more successful.
That's a good one, too. And I can't ever go without, I can't ever go hearing the word Mongol or Mongolian and not thinking about that episode of South Park where the Mongolians knocked down my shitty wall, my shitty Chinese food.
That's so true. That's such funny. That's such a funny episode.
You love it.
Caw, caw. Sir Duncan the Tall. I will make Lord Tyrion's words my own and say, I did not kill Joffrey, but I wish that I had. Watching your vicious bastard die gave me more relief than 1,000 lying whores. That child irritated me so much that he made my ashes itch. It's truly too bad that the books don't have that exact statement.
That's true. Usually the books are better than the show, but that's a good line. That could have been.
That's a good one for sure.
Yeah, there are a few shining examples where the show makes improvements on the books, and that's definitely one of them. Honor to hear from Sir Duncan the Tall. Thank you so much for your feedback. Sir Matthew of House Rep. Arya has been playing the Game of Faces ever since the end of Season 1. First as Arry, the young boy headed to take the black, then as the mysterious noble-born yet trying to pass as low-born cupbearer for Tywin at Harrenhal, and as a beggar looking for food from Frey soldiers. In this episode, she really gets some practice coming up with a backstory for her and the Hound as Tully soldiers looking for a place to stay the night. I find the scene in the catacombs with Jaime and Cersei to be as hard to watch as the Red Wedding. At this point in Jaime's redemption arc, to have him rape his sister on top of his dead son does a real disservice to the character, especially when this is not how it is written in the books. Yeah, that's unfortunate the way it played out, because it was the change was unintentional during the shooting and scripting. So yeah, it's just sucks that it kind of turned out that way.
For sure.
Ah, the introduction to poor Ollie. I remember how much I hated him when he was the final one to stab Jon in the Night's Watch revolt, but watching his origin, it is hard not to understand how he felt betrayed when Jon and Tormund became buddy-buddy.
Sir Patrick of Hindsight says, random thought. Cersei oversaw the creation of Jaime's prosthetic gilded steel. Now she's enlisting the Golden Company. Beneath the gold.
Beneath the gold lies the steel.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Lord Pete Clark, commenting on our last episode, Lady Rachel, says, at track marker about 27 minutes, you guys discussed Tywin Lannister uncharacteristically taking Shay into his bed. It is not uncharacteristic for him to symbolically act as a symbolic lion to consume his enemies, like dressing a stag, King Robert, while talking to Sir Jaime about stepping up for House Lannister. Or in a deleted scene where he talks to the Grand Maester and pulls trout after trout, House Tully, out of the river as he is battling and winning in the Riverlands. Just last episode, he consumed House Stark and melted down Ice and Sansa with her claim to Winterfell. The Starks, for the benefit of House Lannister. In taking Shay, he is consuming Tyrion. Although it is not covered anywhere I can see, in my mind's eye, Tywin Lannister having a long drink of water while watching his men engineer the shifting of the river to drown House Rain in their own gold mine / mountain keep. Yeah, that'd be crazy. I can totally see him doing that, drinking a big glass as he's planning on drowning them all.
Of rainwater.
Yeah, that's hardcore.
Nice.
Hi, Duncan. This is Caroline, Lady Caroline Collins.
Hi, Lady Caroline.
To leave my notes for Breaker of Chains. This was a great episode again. The following of the Purple Wedding, we get to see sort of how all the characters are recovering and, it's really interesting to see. So I've got a few points I wanted to mention, and the first was the Hound and Arya meet the Riverlanders, Sally and her dad. And I just this little storyline that kind of connects with this season and season 7 really had an effect on me. I did notice that they come back to them in season 7 later on, and we get to see the repercussions of the Hound's actions in this situation. And it's cool because it's the show's way of really showing the audience the sad state of the Riverlands. We get to see it a little bit more in the books because we have several different point of view characters in that area. But right now, we only have the Hound and Arya in the Riverlands following the War of the Five Kings. And so we get to see firsthand how much has been destroyed and how many people are in danger. There's gangs of all sorts of different kings, the king's men, so as they're so called, or the mountain's men, going around and raping and pillaging wherever they want to, and taking everybody's gold and taking the crops and whatever they need to do to survive. And it really is crazy. You feel bad for the Riverlanders. I mean, that area is just, it's kind of like the area of the New Gift up by the wall. You know, they get so much raiding and everything. You're surprised that those people don't just move out of that area. Go move to the Reach where it's nice and warm. I don't know if I could live in that area and be constantly in fear of who's going to declare war next and just take on the rest. So, yeah, the Riverlands are, if anybody who doesn't know, they're bordering on the most kingdoms out of all of the 7 kingdoms. I think they border the Stormlands, they border the Westerlands, they border the Reach, and the area of the Neck is even, I think, pretty close to the north. So there's just so many different factions warring at the same time that it's just hellish for the people that live in that area. So anyway, you get to see this this little girl and her dad, and they're sort of living day by day, trying to survive. And the Hound and Arya come in and just, the Hound just takes all their stuff and leaves. And it's interesting because like I said, we see the aftermath of that. And I have to say, like, when I saw them again and their little bodies curled up in the corner, like tears came to my eyes. I was like, oh, this sucks. And it's crazy how like a 10-minute scene can do that. It can establish those characters, make you worried about them. And then, and they bring them back 3 seasons later and you recognize them, you know exactly what happened. And you get to see the Hound dig their graves and bury them in the yard, which I thought was a really cool nod to the books as well, to happen later on. So it really was a really cool way for the show to do that, and I thought that was a great connection for the Hound. And we get to see how the Hound's character changes. He does change in the time that he's with Arya, and then he changes even after she's left for Braavos with his time with Beric Dondarrion and those guys, and the time he spent with the church and everything. I think the whole incident with Brienne kind of makes him contemplate who he is and makes him change his thoughts a little bit, so that when he does encounter those people again, he probably regrets his actions. So that was really cool to see. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about, Tywin. I love Tywin in this episode. And I have to say, I've never really had a huge connection with Tywin. I've always struggled with those characters that don't seem to have a lot of charisma. And, he might not be terribly funny. He doesn't crack a lot of jokes like Tyrion. But he does. It is really interesting to see the way that he can manipulate and change the circumstances to benefit himself. And, what he sees as his family's benefit. I think it's more about him than it is about his family. But I got it when he was talking to Oberyn the most, because I'm thinking, here's somebody that Tywin wouldn't normally be seeking solace with. Oberyn's, he had to kick all the whores out before he could talk to him, and we know how he feels about whores. But he talks to Oberyn, and now he's taking this guy who he knows he has a grudge against him, and he's going to take him and put him on the small council. He's going to make him a judge in the trial. And the way I see it, what he's doing here is he's saving Tyrion's life. He's saying Oberyn's not gonna decide to kill Tyrion, because they've had that conversation. He knows that they get along. He said that you guys have talked at length, and and he sees that they have those things in common. So he knows that Oberyn is not going to convict Tyrion of the murder. He's also possibly thinking that maybe Oberyn had something to do with it, which we know he didn't, but you could see from his point of view that it could be a possibility. He's trying to save this situation. He's got a daughter who's absolutely convinced that his son killed the king. Oh no, daughter that's convinced, that Tyrion killed the king, and she's on the warpath. She wants him dead, and so he's like, all right, we've got to save this situation. Is there a way that I can have my daughter be happy at the same time my son be saved? And he's also looking at strengthening those ties with Dorne and trying to recover that relationship, try to bring them back into the fold, because like he says, they do have worries outside the realm. They have Daenerys, who is, I don't know if he really believes that she's a threat, but that's his party line at the moment. We have threats outside of our kingdom. We have to make sure that we're protected. And Dorne is a famous Targaryen sympathizer, so they might be the first to turn over to Daenerys' side if she ever crosses the Narrow Sea. So he's thinking that far ahead. He's thinking, how do I get these guys to stay on our side? Super cool. And he's just constantly calculating, thinking of ways to make everything benefit him. And same thing with Tommen, when they're talking over Joffrey's dead body, and he's like, your brother wasn't a good king, he's not a good guy, but you can be a good king. All you have to do is listen to me. So he's looking for a situation where he was in, before, when he was friends with the Mad King, and he was, before Aerys was a Mad King, he was actually a pretty jovial guy, and, kind of let Tywin do all the hard work, let him run the kingdom for him, and the place was actually a pretty great place to be before the king went mad. Tywin had control of everything. He loved having his hand in everything, and I think Robert Baratheon, to a certain extent, allowed him that too. He had his ear because he was married. Robert Baratheon was married to his daughter. He had everything under his little thumb. So he was happy as a clam up there in Castle Rock, controlling everything from where he was. But now he's had Joffrey, who is not the easiest guy to control, and you can tell he was starting to get real frustrated with him in the last few episodes. So he's now seeing, okay, this is an opportunity to turn this around. I can get back to where I was in control, and I could kind of forge these alliances and make sure that our family's name is well upheld. So really interesting with Tywin. I like that this episode. And finally, Daenerys. I loved the way she did the breaker of chains right at the end. You see all the chains against the walls, and that got me to thinking that Daenerys really does have a great way of finding battle tactics that work, and they work because of the power structures in the area that she's working with. She knows how to read the people. She knows how to sort of turn people against each other in a way that benefits her in the long run, which in a way kind of mirrors what Tywin does, but in a totally different way, because she's not looking to benefit herself as much as she's looking to benefit her future subjects and the people that are already serving her in her armies and as her subjects. So that was really cool, and I'm interested to see what she's going to do in season 8, because she really hasn't reached her full potential in Westeros. I feel like she's not performing at her top strength, and she really needs to use that strategy that she does so well in seeing, as Missandei says, there's always a path that maybe your advisors don't see, only you see. And I think that that's something that she can do in the future. She just hasn't had a chance yet. So I'm interested to see that in season 8. That's all I have for Breaker of Chains. Thanks. Talk to you next week. Bye.
Good feedback.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, as always, Lady Caroline.
Hello, Sir Duncan. It's Zach again. 7 blessings to you, good sir.
And you as well.
These are my notes and comments from Breaker of Chains. To start off with, a great quote from Littlefinger. Money buys a man silence for a time. A bolt in the heart buys it forever. Very true. Very true
done.
Words he speaks there. Poor Dantos. I get the feeling that Dantos knew he wasn't going to live through this, because when he gave Sansa the necklace in the last episode, or maybe 2 episodes ago, he says something to the effect of the necklace being the last thing House Hollard is going to do before their name disappears forever.
Oh, yeah.
So
good foreshadow.
I think he had a good idea that he wasn't going to make it out alive. Okay, I think Littlefinger basically pins Joffrey's murder on Sansa when he crushes up the stone from the necklace and then sweeps the necklace and the broken pieces into the boat with poor dead Dantos. I'm guessing he does this so it makes it pins it on Sansa, but that basically makes her have to flee the city and thus go with him, and so he can basically be in control of her and use her as a pawn, which, you know, we know that he ends up doing. But anyway, I had forgotten that he crushed up that necklace and swept it into the boat with Dantos. I feel like that was certainly done on purpose. An interesting scene transition. Olenna is talking with Marjorie about how Tommen will be a lot better, and that she'll be better off with Tommen than she would have been with Joff. And then that scene transitions to Tywin grooming Tommen to be the king. He's grooming him over Joffrey's dead body right there in the Sept, despite Cersei's protests. So, that's, I think kind of showing you where Olenna was at with the difference between Tommen and Joffrey and how that was going to bode for Marjorie in her marriage. My next note was it's kind of funny. Tywin starts to give Tommen the birds and the bees talk as they're walking out of the Sept. And I was like, okay, well, his grandfather's going to give him that speech because he doesn't have a father to give him that talk. But wait. Just then they bump into Jaime, obviously Tommen's actual father, but not a father figure in his life. And another funny part of that I thought was Tywin goes to tell Tommen, it's all very straightforward, and then they bump into Jaime. And I think that struck me as pretty funny. It's like, yeah, it's pretty straightforward unless you're boinking your sister. And then, of course, Jaime goes into the Sept to do what he does there, and that's a whole nother kettle of fish. When Arya gets questioned by that traveler on the road about who they fought for, what house they fought for, she used her street smarts to know that she was in the Riverlands. So the best answer to try and give the guy was that they fought for House Tully. So it just shows you how keen and how quick-witted and smart Arya is. We learned a lot about guest right from the Red Wedding, and then Bran's story about the rat cook. But here the Hound sort of commits what I'll call reverse guest right betrayal. He was the guest, but he basically betrayed the man and his daughter by taking their silver and basically bonking him on the head and leaving him for dead. And of course, in season 7, I think it was season 7, he obviously comes back on these people in their house and finds them dead. And I think he feels kind of bad about it at that point. But the Hound's come a long way since then. But anyway, the Hound kind of, he's their guest, but he don't care and takes what he wants to take. I find it interesting that when Tyrion's in his cell, when he's talking to Pod, he even considers if Tywin could be behind Joffrey's murder. So I never really thought much about this until we've been going through this rewatch and the conversations that Tywin has with Olenna. And the show never confirms it, but I don't know. I'm kind of buying a little bit the possibility that Tywin, he either knew the plan or he knew that there might be a plan, and he didn't do anything to stop it.
Wouldn't surprise
me. Because
me,
after
man.
Joffrey's little outburst in that small council meeting, and Tywin basically sent him off to bed, I'm thinking Tywin may have had enough of Joffrey. So maybe, who knows? Maybe Tywin had a part to play in the plot to kill Joffrey. Okay, I have a question. Who offered the knighthood to Pod? I don't think we ever really find that out. I guess, we could figure that it was, some henchman of Cersei or of Tywin, or, maybe they were both in on it to try and get Pod's testimony. But I'd forgotten that they offered him a knighthood. I can't remember if that happens in the books or not. Anyway, I was trying to think who would have done that. I don't think we ever got full confirmation on that. And then my last note was that how tactically smart Jon is. He immediately sees the tactical difference between the wildling attack on the village and Ollie comes asking for their help. The difference between that and the mutineers that are at Craster's Keep, and how it's different with the fact that they have intel about the Night's Watch, their patrols, their rotations, their numbers, all that sort of thing. Stupid old Alistair Thorne basically equates the two things, and when Jon says, we got to go get the mutineers, he says, we've just been over this, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, it shows you how smart and how much of a command mindset that Jon has. But anyway, those are all my notes, and thanks a lot, and talk to y'all next time. Bye.
Great to hear from you again, Zach. We had a lot of the same thoughts, it turns out. That's pretty awesome. Looking forward to hearing from you again soon, brother. All right, that's our show, episode 75. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yes, thanks for listening and for writing into Raven's Calls. We love hearing your guys' feedback. It's always awesome.
Definitely. Next episode, we'll be covering Season 4, Episode 4, Oathkeeper. Give it a watch and send us your thoughts. We'd love to read them on air. If you'd like to call, you can always call us at 813-JOFFREY. That's 813-563-3739.
If you would like to write in, you can email us at ravens@gameofmicrophones.com.
Check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/GOM podcast.
Imp slap! We're also on Twitter and Instagram at GOM podcast. Give us a like on Facebook and an iTunes rating/review.
Our friend Travis is doing a Kickstarter to help put the finishing touches on his new meadery, where they'll also be selling their handmade leather goods. Check it out at weirdleatherandmead.com. That's WYRD leatherandmead.com. Thanks a lot, guys, and I can't wait to try that mead for myself. All right, that's our show.
Thanks for listening. On your way where?
Why do you care? Might book passage across the narrow sea. Fight as a sellsword. Second sons could be. Seems like a good fit for me.
I'd like to see Bravos one day.
Why Bravos?
I have friends there.
I doubt it.
He's not saying that he doesn't want to love her or that he doesn't love her. It's just like, why are you such a bitch?
Yeah.
I love you, but you're a bitch.
I'll kick you in the balls! Bitch! I love you!
Yep.
So, and then you're the worst shit in the Seven Kingdoms.
There's worse shits than me. Something about the word stench is just really funny.
It's wrong.
So
it's like the word moist.
So he brings him a quill, some parchment, some duck sausage, not dick sausage like Ramsay eats.
Which is true.
Really sums up Pod. Yeah, he's a giver. I believe it.
He pours a really good cup of wine.
Yeah, totally. And he gives Brienne the best massages after long days of battle. I'm sure.
Oh yeah, because he's a sex prodigy.
Hey, your head was in the gutter there. I was just talking about how he ends up being with Brienne.
Oh, okay. I was just like, I don't know. Maybe they hook up.
No,
We'll see.
I'm just kidding. It was an innuendo.
And, she's not horrible looking, but that whore is freaky.
She's fetching.
Like, she gives me the heebie-jeebies. Pretty little thing.
Right, like I've seen Battlestar Galactica. I knows what happens when strangers touch your baby.
Yeah, I mean, she plays it so well. I mean, she's wretched looking. I mean, she's just rode hard and put away wet.
Oh.
I think they're cleaning out, like,
a condom! Yeah, I noticed that too. I have that in my notes. I'm gross! It's
really not a place to raise children or live, like, a normal, like, non-whore life. I thought it was really sad. Little Sam starts crying as Big Sam leaves.
Wait, you mean Sam's dick or the baby? Because I think Sam's dick was a little bit sad there, too, that Gilly was going to be gone.
Both. This scene is where we kind of learned that from Maester Aemon that there's just a little over 100 men. And that includes everybody, including Maester Aemon.
Yeah, who is definitely not somebody to call on for a sword fight.
No. And
he can't aim a bow very well.